It's amazing how quickly your life can implode over a single phone call. One moment you're adjusting your veil, and the next, everything you've planned for months comes crashing down around you. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking as I reread the message from our wedding planner. 3 hours before my wedding, and she'd canceled. Just like that. No explanation, no apology, just a brief text saying she couldn't make it. This can't be happening, I whispered, my voice barely audible in the bridal suite. The champagne glasses clinked mockingly behind me as my sister Kelly rushed around, trying to coordinate with the venue staff. "Samantha, breathe," Kelly said, gripping my shoulders. "We can figure this out. David's family has connections." "No," I cut her off sharply. "I don't want to involve them, especially not Maggie." The mention of my soon-to-be mother-in-law made my stomach turn. Something about this felt wrong. The timing was too perfect, too calculated. My phone buzzed again. This time it was David. "Mom's offering to help. She knows someone who can step in." Of course she did. I'd seen enough of Maggie's helpful interventions over the past year to recognize her handiwork. The caterer who suddenly doubled their prices, the florist who mysteriously lost our order, the venue that almost canceled due to a scheduling conflict. Each time, Maggie swooped in with her own preferred vendor, her own vision of what our wedding should be. "Tell your mother thanks, but we've got it handled," I typed back, even though we definitely didn't. The door burst open, and Sophia, our mutual friend, rushed in. I just ran into Maggie in the hallway. She's already calling someone named Patricia to take over the planning. My fingers curled into fists, crushing the delicate lace of my dress. Did she seem surprised about our planner canceling? Sophia hesitated, and that pause told me everything I needed to know. "She was smiling, wasn't she?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Like she just won something," Sophia admitted quietly. Kelly swore under her breath. "That manipulative—" "Ladies!" A smooth voice interrupted from the doorway. Maggie stood there, perfect in her designer suit, not a hair out of place. "I've taken care of everything. Patricia will be here in 20 minutes. She's much more suitable for a Mitchell family wedding." The way she emphasized suitable made my skin crawl. I caught her subtle glance at my dress, the one I'd chosen instead of her recommended designer. "How fortunate that Patricia was available on such short notice," I said, meeting her gaze, almost like she was waiting for the call. Something flickered in Maggie's eyes. Satisfaction, maybe, or challenge. "Providence smiles on those who plan ahead, dear. Or those who orchestrate disasters," I muttered after she left. Kelly grabbed my arm. "Sam, you don't think she actually convinced our wedding planner to bail last minute? Created chaos so she could swoop in and take control?" I laughed bitterly. It's exactly what she'd do. I walked to the window, watching guests arrive in their expensive cars. Below, I could see David greeting people, handsome in his tuxedo, completely unaware of his mother's machinations. "What are you going to do?" Sophia asked. I touched the window, leaving a small smudge on the perfect glass. "For now, I'm going to marry David, but after that," I turned to face them, something hard and cold settling in my chest. "I'm going to make sure Maggie regrets every single game she's played with my life." "Sam," Kelly's voice held a warning. "No," I said firmly. "I'm done being the bigger person. She wants to play games? Fine. But she's about to learn that this veterinarian from the wrong side of town knows exactly how to deal with snakes." The mirror reflected my image: white dress, perfect makeup, and eyes that had lost their last trace of innocence. In 3 hours, I'd be a Mitchell. And then the real game would begin. Patricia's heels clicked against the marble floor like a metronome counting down to disaster. The reception hall buzzed with whispered conversations and judgmental glances. My wedding had become exactly what I'd fought against. A Mitchell Society spectacle. The ice sculpture should be centered, Maggie commanded, waving her hand dismissively at the staff. And those flowers are completely wrong. Patricia, didn't we discuss burgundy roses? The bride specifically requested wildflowers, Patricia replied, her voice wavering. I stood in the doorway, still in my wedding dress, watching my carefully planned celebration transform into Maggie's vision. David appeared beside me, his hand finding mine. It looks different, he said carefully. It looks like your mother's annual charity gala, I replied, keeping my voice low, complete with her usual crowd of social climbers. As if on cue, I spotted several unfamiliar faces among our guests, Maggie's friends who definitely hadn't been on our invitation list. I'll talk to her, David promised, but I grabbed his arm. Don't. It's what she wants, to create drama between us on our wedding day. A commotion near the cake table drew our attention. Kelly was arguing with Patricia, her hands gesturing at the elaborate 5-tier monstrosity that had replaced our original choice. That's not the cake they ordered, Kelly insisted. Show me the contract. Patricia's eyes darted to Maggie, who swooped in like a perfectly coiffed vulture. There was a tragic mishap with the original baker. Fortunately, I know the most extraordinary pâtissier. Tragic mishap? I interrupted, stepping forward. What exactly happened to our cake, Maggie? The room grew quieter, guests pretending not to eavesdrop while hanging on every word. Oh, darling. Maggie's smile was razor sharp. You really should be mingling with your guests instead of worrying about such details. Although, her gaze swept over the crowd, I noticed several of your invited guests couldn't make it. How unfortunate. My stomach clenched. I'd noticed the same thing. Several of my friends and colleagues had canceled last minute, citing various emergencies. Samantha, a gravelly voice cut through the tension. Evelyn Mitchell stood nearby, elegant in her vintage Chanel, watching the scene with shrewd eyes. Come sit with me for a moment. I followed David's grandmother to a quiet corner, aware of Maggie's gaze burning into my back. Your mother-in-law, Evelyn said, adjusting her pearl necklace, has always believed control equals love. She planned David's entire life before he could walk, when he defied her by choosing you. She paused, studying my face. Well, let's just say she's not used to losing. I'm not something to win or lose, I said through gritted teeth. No, you're not. Evelyn's eyes glittered. You're something far more dangerous. You're change, and Maggie fears change more than anything. Before I could respond, Tom appeared, his face tight with concern. Sam, got a minute? There's something you need to see. He led me to a service corridor, pulling out his phone. I overheard Patricia on the phone earlier. Look at these texts. The messages showed a conversation between Patricia and Maggie from weeks ago, planning today's takeover in detail. Every emergency had been orchestrated, every replacement vendor prearranged. She's been planning this for months, Tom said quietly. I handed the phone back, my hands steady despite the rage building inside me. Thank you, Tom. This is helpful. Sam? He hesitated. What are you going to do? I watched David across the room, laughing with his father, blissfully unaware of his mother's machinations. Right now, I'm going to smile, dance with my husband, and play the grateful daughter-in-law. And later, I said, smoothing my dress, I'm going to learn everything there is to know about Maggie Mitchell. Every secret, every weakness, every skeleton in her designer closet. Because this isn't just about my wedding anymore. It's about making sure she never tries to control anyone's life again. Tom's expression shifted from concern to determination. Whatever you need, I'm in. I returned to the reception. accepting congratulations and pretending not to notice how Maggie had rearranged the seating to separate me from my family. But with each fake smile and polite nod, I was taking mental notes, gathering ammunition. The game had changed. Maggie thought she was teaching me a lesson about power and control. Instead, she was teaching me exactly how to destroy her. The email arrived during surgery. I was elbow deep in a German shepherd's abdomen when my phone buzzed repeatedly on the counter. Only after I'd closed up and sent the dog to recovery did I check the messages. Did you see what she posted? Kelly's text read, followed by several screenshots. There it was, on Maggie's social media. A carefully crafted post about her concerns for David's well-being, subtly highlighting my working-class background and suggesting I was taking advantage of the Mitchell family's generosity. She'd even dredged up an old photo of me from college, looking decidedly unglamorous at a protest rally. Your wife seems to have quite the colorful past, read one comment from her society friends. Money can't buy class, wrote another. Tom appeared in my office doorway as I scrolled through the comments. Those society vultures are having a field day with this. She's trying to paint me as a gold digger, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. But that's not even the worst part. I showed him the email that had triggered Kelly's warning. It was from the veterinary board announcing a surprise audit of my practice. The sender's address belonged to one of Maggie's closest friends. She's going after my career now. The words tasted bitter. This isn't just about social standing anymore. Sam, Tom hesitated. There's something else you should know. I overheard David on the phone earlier. Maggie's been pressuring him about the prenup, suggesting he add new conditions. The room seemed to tilt slightly. We already signed the prenup. She can't. She's claiming new evidence of financial misconduct on your part. A knock interrupted us. David stood in the doorway, his expression troubled. Can we talk? Tom squeezed my shoulder as he left, closing the door behind him. Your mother's busy today, I said before David could speak. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I usually found endearing. Sam, she's just worried about what? That I'll steal the family silver? Or maybe she's worried I'll expose how she's been manipulating everyone around her for years? It's not that simple. He pulled out his phone, showing me another post, this one from an anonymous account, detailing past Mitchell family scandals. Someone's been digging into our family history. Mom thinks it's you. I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. Of course she does, because heaven forbid anyone else have dirt on the mighty Mitchell family. Is it you? The question hung between us like a blade. No, I said quietly, but I'm starting to wish it was. Before he could respond, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, elegant as always but with an urgency in her movements. David, your father needs you at the office, immediately. Her tone left no room for argument. After he left, Evelyn closed the door and turned to me. Maggie's playing a dangerous game, but she's not as clever as she thinks. Did you know she tried this same routine with Richard's first fiancé? I hadn't known Richard had been engaged before Maggie. What happened? The girl left, couldn't handle the pressure. Evelyn's eyes glittered. But you're made of stronger stuff, aren't you? She pulled an envelope from her purse. These are copies of some interesting documents about Maggie's past, including how she really joined the Mitchell family. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The contents made my eyes widen. Why are you showing me this? Because, Evelyn said, her voice steel-wrapped in silk. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to prove you can hit harder. The question is, are you willing to throw the punch? I stared at the documents, thinking of the audit, the social media attacks, the prenup manipulation, each move designed to isolate and discredit me. Yes, I said finally. I am. Evelyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Good, because Maggie's not going to stop until someone makes her. Just remember, in this family, nothing is ever quite what it seems. She left me alone with the documents, their revelations burning in my hands like hot coals. I had what I needed to destroy Maggie's carefully constructed image, but as I read deeper, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played by forces I didn't fully understand. The question was, whose game was I really playing? The Mitchell family's annual charity gala loomed ahead, all gleaming marble and crystal chandeliers. I adjusted my borrowed designer dress, feeling like an imposter despite the perfect fit. The documents Evelyn had given me burned in my clutch, waiting for the right moment. Ready? David squeezed my hand as we approached the entrance. I nodded, noticing how he unconsciously straightened his tie. Another nervous tell. He knew something was wrong, but couldn't quite piece it together. Inside, Maggie held court near the champagne fountain, her laugh carrying across the room with practiced precision. Her eyes found mine, and her smile sharpened. "Darling," she called out, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I was just telling everyone about your wonderful work with animals. So, noble." The way she said noble made it sound like a character flaw. "Speaking of noble causes," I replied, matching her volume, "I heard the most fascinating story about your early days with the Mitchell Family Foundation." Her champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. Tom appeared at my elbow, right on cue. "Samantha, could I borrow you for a moment? There's someone you should meet." He led me to a corner where Kelly waited with an elderly man I didn't recognize. His face was familiar somehow, but I couldn't place it. "This is Harold Bennett," Kelly said quietly. "He used to work for the Mitchell Foundation." The old man's eyes were sharp despite his frail appearance. "You're the one asking questions about Margaret Mitchell." "I'm interested in the truth," I said carefully. "Truth?" He gave a bitter laugh. "That woman wouldn't know truth if it bit her. I was there when she orchestrated the takeover of the foundation from Richard's first wife, destroyed that poor woman's reputation completely." My hand tightened on my clutch. "What exactly did she do?" Before he could answer, Evelyn appeared, looking alarmed. "Samantha, dear, we need to talk. Now." She practically dragged me into an empty study, closing the door firmly. "You need to be very careful about what you do next." "Why? Because I'm getting too close to the truth about Maggie? Because you're not seeing the whole picture." Evelyn's usual poise cracked slightly. "Those documents I gave you, they're not just about Maggie. They could destroy this entire family." A knock interrupted us. David entered, his face uncharacteristically stern. "I just got an interesting call from the bank. Someone's been accessing old foundation records using my credentials." My stomach dropped. I hadn't been careful enough covering my tracks. "That would be me," Evelyn said smoothly. "I asked Samantha to help me investigate some discrepancies." David's expression darkened. "Does this have anything to do with the anonymous posts about our family?" "What posts?" I asked, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. He pulled out his phone, showing us a fresh social media post, one I hadn't seen before. It detailed exactly how Maggie had manipulated her way into the Mitchell family, including documents I recognized from my own research, but I hadn't posted them. "This isn't me," I said, looking at Evelyn. Her face gave nothing away. The door opened again. Maggie stood there, Richard beside her looking grave. "No," she said. "It wasn't you. It was me." The room went silent. "I've been posting my own secrets," Maggie continued, "because someone's been threatening to expose much worse ones. And now I know who." Her gaze fixed on Evelyn, who merely smiled. "You always were clever, Margaret," Evelyn said, "but not quite clever enough." I looked between them, suddenly feeling like a pawn in a much larger game. The documents in my clutch weren't ammunition, they were bait, and I'd taken it completely. "What's really going on here?" David demanded. "Ask your grandmother," Maggie said bitterly. "Ask her about the real reason she brought Samantha into this fight." Evelyn's smile never wavered, but her eyes were cold. "Sometimes, dear, the best way to destroy an enemy is to give them exactly what they want." I felt David tense beside me as the truth began to dawn. I wasn't fighting Maggie's manipulation. I was caught in the crossfire of a decades-old war between two masters of deception, and I had no idea whose side I should be on. The Mitchell Foundation's quarterly board meeting wasn't meant to be a battlefield, but I could taste the tension in the air as I took my seat beside David. Maggie sat across from us, perfectly composed despite the whispers circulating about her latest social media scandal. Evelyn presided at the head of the table, her presence somehow both reassuring and threatening. "Before we begin," Richard said, shuffling through papers, "there's the matter of unauthorized access to Foundation records." My fingers tightened around my pen. Beside me, David's breathing changed slightly. "Fascinating timing," Maggie said, her voice silk over steel, "especially given the recent articles about our family's history." "Perhaps we should discuss the Foundation's original mission," Evelyn interrupted smoothly. "Back when Catherine Mitchell was chair." The room went still. Catherine, Richard's first wife, the woman Maggie had replaced. I watched Maggie's face, catching the slight twitch in her jaw. "Ancient history," Maggie dismissed, but her knuckles were white around her water glass. "Not entirely." I pulled out my tablet, heart pounding. "I've been reviewing the original charter. There are some interesting discrepancies between then and now." "Samantha," David warned quietly, but I continued. "For instance, the educational outreach program Catherine started. It was quite successful until it was suddenly discontinued in 1992. I met Maggie's eyes. "The same year you joined the board." "Those programs were inefficient," Maggie snapped. "They were helping working-class students attend college," I countered. "Students like me." Evelyn's smile grew sharper. "Perhaps we should put it to a vote, reinstating some of Catherine's original initiatives." "Absolutely not." Maggie stood, her chair scraping back. "This is ridiculous. We all know what's happening here. Your new daughter-in-law is trying to—" "To what?" I interrupted, standing as well. "Expose how you've twisted this foundation to serve your social climbing, or how you used it to destroy Catherine's reputation when she started asking questions about missing funds." The words hung in the air like smoke. I hadn't meant to reveal that piece yet, but Maggie's face told me I'd hit home. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she hissed. "Show them the documents, Samantha," Evelyn commanded softly. My tablet shook slightly as I pulled up the files. Financial records from 1992, specifically transfers to offshore accounts under the name M. Reynolds. Your maiden name, Maggie. Richard's face had gone pale. "Margaret, it's not what you think," Maggie said quickly. "I was protecting us. Catherine was going to expose—" "That you were embezzling," I suggested. "That the entire Mitchell fortune was built on fraud," Maggie shouted. The silence that followed was deafening. "Well," Evelyn said into the quiet, "that's not quite how I planned this revelation." David stood slowly. "Grandmother, what exactly is going on?" "Ask your father," she replied. "He's known all along, haven't you, Richard?" I looked between them all, Maggie's desperate face, Richard's guilt, Evelyn's calculated calm, and David's growing horror. This wasn't just about Maggie anymore. The entire foundation, the Mitchell legacy, was built on lies. "The vote stands," Evelyn declared. "We'll decide today whether to reinstate Catherine's programs and review all financial decisions made since 1992. "You can't," Maggie whispered. Actually, with Samantha's proxy vote from the shares David gave her as a wedding gift, we can. I felt David stiffen beside me. We both knew he hadn't given me any shares. I never, he began. Check your papers, dear. Evelyn smiled. You'd be surprised what you've signed recently. The realization hit me like ice water. I wasn't just a pawn in their game. I was the weapon they'd both been waiting to use. Maggie had tried to destroy me to protect her secrets, while Evelyn had cultivated me to expose them. And now I had to choose, follow through with the vote and potentially destroy the family I'd married into, or back down and let decades of corruption continue. David's hand found mine under the table, squeezing once, but I couldn't tell if it was in support or warning. The board members waited, pens poised over their voting cards, while I stood at the crossroads between justice and destruction. The vote, Evelyn prompted, begins now. The Mitchell Summer Gala sparkled with false perfection, like a diamond made of glass. I watched from the terrace as David paced near the fountain, phone pressed to his ear, his gestures growing more agitated with each passing moment. The press is already here, Kelly whispered, appearing at my elbow. Maggie's people are trying to control the narrative, but the truth has a way of slipping through. Evelyn finished, joining us with 2 champagne flutes. She offered me one with a knowing smile. Especially when it's carefully guided. The documents I'd planned to reveal tonight felt heavy in my clutch, but something about Evelyn's confidence made me uneasy. You never told me how you got these records, I said carefully. Didn't I? Her eyes glittered. Perhaps you should ask Catherine. My glass nearly slipped from my fingers. Catherine is dead. Is she? Evelyn's smile widened as she gestured toward the arriving guests. A woman in her 60s stepped out of a black car, her presence causing an immediate stir. Maggie across the garden went absolutely still. You planned this, I realized, watching the color drain from Maggie's face. All of it. Of course I did. Evelyn sipped her champagne, and you played your part beautifully. David was walking toward us now, his expression dark. The board members are all here, and they've seen the news. What news? I pulled out my phone, finding dozens of missed notifications. The headlines hit like physical blows. Mitchell Foundation fraud exposed. Decades of financial misconduct. Whistleblower reveals family corruption. But I hadn't leaked anything yet. You didn't really think I'd leave this to chance, did you? Evelyn asked softly. The documents I gave you were copies. The originals went to the press an hour ago. The garden spun slightly. You used me. We all used each other, Catherine said, joining our group. Her voice was stronger than I'd expected. Maggie used you to protect her position. Evelyn used you to destroy it. And you? She smiled sadly. You used them both for revenge. Sam. David's voice cracked slightly. Did you know about this? Before I could answer, Maggie stormed over, her perfect composure finally shattered. You vindictive little... Careful, Margaret, Evelyn cut in. The press is watching. The press? Maggie laughed, the sound brittle. You've destroyed everything. The foundation, the family name. You did that, I snapped, when you stole it from Catherine. I protected this family. Maggie's voice rose. Everything I did was to preserve what we built. What you stole, Catherine corrected quietly. And now, Evelyn added, what you've lost. Cameras flashed as reporters approached. David stepped away from me, his expression unreadable. In that moment, I realized I'd lost him too. David, I reached for him, but he pulled back. Was any of it real? He asked. Us? Or was I just part of your revenge? I loved you, I whispered. I still do. But you loved revenge more. He walked away as the reporters swarmed, their questions becoming a deafening roar. Maggie was being led inside by Richard, both their faces ashen. Catherine stood watching them, victory and sadness warring in her expression. And Evelyn? She simply smiled, raising her glass in a mock toast. "Congratulations, dear," she said. "You've won." But as I stood there, watching my marriage crumble and the Mitchell family implode, victory felt like ashes in my mouth. I'd wanted justice, but this felt like destruction. I'd wanted to expose the truth, but I'd become part of the lie. Kelly appeared beside me, gripping my arm. "We need to go, now." As she led me through the chaos, I caught a final glimpse of David. He stood between his parents, his back straight, his shoulders bearing the weight of his family's disgrace. He didn't look back. The night air hit my face as we reached Kelly's car, and only then did I realize I was crying. "What have I done?" I whispered. But the only answer was the sound of camera shutters and the distant murmur of a family falling apart. A destruction I'd helped orchestrate, even if I hadn't pulled the final trigger. I'd become exactly what I'd hated: a manipulator, a destroyer, a Mitchell in all but name. And now I had nothing left to show for it but the bitter taste of a victory that felt more like defeat. 3 days after the gala, I found Maggie sitting alone in her garden, methodically cutting roses from their stems. The morning papers lay scattered around her feet, their headlines screaming about the Mitchell family's disgrace. "Have you come to gloat?" She didn't look up from her pruning. "I came to understand." I remained standing, watching her hands shake slightly as she cut another rose. "Why did you do it? All of it? You think you've won something, don't you?" She finally met my eyes. "Destroyed the big bad Mitchell matriarch, exposed all our dirty secrets, but you have no idea what you've really done." "Then tell me." She laughed, the sound brittle as frozen grass. "Did Catherine tell you why she really left? Not the sanitized version Evelyn fed you, but the truth?" Before I could answer, David appeared at the garden entrance. He looked exhausted, his usual polish replaced by shadows under his eyes. "The FBI is here," he said quietly. Maggie's scissors dropped to the ground. "Already?" "They're not here for you." David's voice cracked slightly. "They're here for grandmother." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What?" "Oh, you clever fool," Maggie whispered. "You never wondered why Evelyn was so eager to help you? Why she had all those convenient documents ready? The Foundation's corruption was a cover?" David stepped closer, his face hard. "For something much worse, the missing money, the offshore accounts. They weren't Mom's, they were Evelyn's." "But Catherine?" "Found out," Maggie finished, "and Evelyn made sure she disappeared. I didn't drive Catherine away, Samantha. I helped her escape. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. I sank onto a stone bench, the morning sun suddenly too bright. All these years," Maggie continued, "I played the villain, let everyone think I was the controlling monster, because as long as they were watching me, they weren't watching Evelyn," I finished, bile rising in my throat. "And now, thanks to your crusade for justice, the one person who could keep her in check is ruined." Maggie's smile was razor sharp. "While Evelyn walks away with everything." "She's already gone, isn't she?" I asked David. He nodded. "Left last night. The Foundation's accounts are empty." "You were so focused on revenge," Maggie said softly. "You never saw you were just another piece on her board. Just like I was, just like Catherine. Where is Catherine now?" "Safe, hidden, which is more than I can say for any of us anymore." Footsteps on gravel announced the FBI agent's approach. David moved to stand between them and his mother, but Maggie waved him away. "Don't," she said. "Some fights you can't win." As the agents led Maggie away for questioning, I caught her final whisper. "I hope your revenge was worth it." David and I stood in the ruined garden, surrounded by half-cut roses and scattered newspapers. The distance between us felt infinite. "I never wanted this," I said. "Didn't you?" His voice was tired. "You wanted to destroy my family. Congratulations, mission accomplished." "David, the funny thing is," he continued, "Mom was trying to protect me. From Evelyn, from the truth, from all of it. And I let you tear her down because I thought I was choosing love over loyalty." He turned to leave, then paused. "But maybe they're the same thing. And maybe we both forgot that somewhere along the way." I watched him walk away, understanding finally hitting me like a physical blow. In my quest for justice, I'd become the weapon Evelyn needed. In trying to expose one manipulator, I'd played right into the hands of a worse one. The roses Maggie had been cutting lay scattered across the ground, their thorns still sharp, their petals already beginning to wilt. Like revenge, I realized, beautiful from a distance, but deadly up close, and ultimately destined to decay. I pulled out my phone and dialed Kelly's number. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "We need to find Catherine. She's the only one who knows the whole truth." And then what? I looked at the abandoned garden, at the chaos I'd helped create. Then we fix what I broke. All of it. But as police cars pulled up to the Mitchell estate, their lights painting the roses in flashes of red and blue, I wondered if anything could ever be truly fixed once it had been so thoroughly shattered. The small cafe on the outskirts of Seattle smelled like rain and coffee. Catherine sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, looking nothing like the polished society woman from the gala. Here, she seemed more real, more human. "Evelyn's in Singapore," I said, sliding the envelope across the table. "These are the account numbers Kelly traced." Catherine nodded, unsurprised. She always had exit strategies. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? Before I could answer, the cafe door chimed. David walked in, followed by Maggie. The sight of them together made my chest ache. They joined us silently, David's hand brushing mine as he sat down. The touch felt like forgiveness and accusation all at once. "The FBI cleared me," Maggie said quietly, "but the foundation is finished." "Good." Catherine's voice was steel. "It needs to be rebuilt from the ground up, properly this time." "With whose money?" David asked. "Mine." I pulled out another envelope. "I'm selling my clinic." The silence that followed felt heavy with possibility and pain. "Sam, no," David started, but I cut him off. "I broke this. I need to fix it." I met Maggie's eyes. "Not for revenge or justice, but because it's right. And what do you want in return?" Maggie's question carried years of distrust. "Nothing." I smiled slightly. "That's the point." Catherine reached into her bag, producing a worn leather journal. "These are the original foundation documents, the real ones, not Evelyn's versions. They outline a different kind of legacy, one about helping people, not controlling them." "Like the educational programs," I said. "Yes." Catherine opened the journal. "Programs that could help students like you, Samantha, not because they're worthy of Mitchell charity, but because everyone deserves a chance to build their own legacy." David's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. "It won't be easy," Maggie warned. "The Mitchell name is toxic now." "Then we'll use a different name," I suggested. "The Catherine Turner Foundation." Both Catherine and Maggie looked startled. "Why Turner?" Catherine asked. "Because names have power," I said, "and it's time to build something new instead of fighting over something old." David's thumb traced circles on my palm as Maggie and Catherine exchanged long looks across the table. "I'll help," Maggie said finally, "but not as a director, as an advisor only." "Agreed," Catherine nodded. "And you, David?" "I go where my wife goes." His voice was quiet but certain. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows like applause or perhaps warning. We sat there, 5 people who had hurt each other in countless ways, trying to build something from the wreckage of revenge. "There's one condition," I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Complete transparency. No more secrets, no more manipulation. We do this in the open or not at all." "Even if it means facing uncomfortable truths?" Maggie asked. "Especially then." Catherine closed her journal with a soft thud. "Then let's begin." As we left the cafe, David pulled me aside while Maggie and Catherine walked ahead, already deep in discussion about restructuring plans. "You're really selling your clinic?" he asked. "Already sold." I watched his face carefully. "Unless you think I'm making another mistake." "No." He touched my cheek gently. "I think you're finally making things right. We all are." The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp. Ahead of us, Maggie and Catherine paused, waiting. Behind us lay the ruins of what revenge had wrought. Before us stretched the harder path of reconstruction. I took David's hand and stepped forward, understanding finally that true justice isn't about destroying what's broken. It's about building something better from the pieces. But as we walked toward our waiting family, I felt the weight of Evelyn's account numbers in my pocket. Some choices, I realized, would have to wait for another day. Some forms of justice require patience rather than revenge. For now, though, we had work to do. And maybe that was enough.
Nova Design needs fresh vision, Elena. Someone who understands the digital landscape, Trent Sullivan said, his eyes fixed on the sleek tablet in his hands rather than meeting mine. The board feels it's time for a transition. I sat motionless in the modernist chair facing his desk, the termination documents placed between us like a declaration of war. 26 years at Nova, from junior designer to creative director, ended with a rehearsed speech about company direction and evolving markets. Fresh vision, I repeated, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. My team just won the Richardson account, a $30 million project. Our biggest ever. "And we're grateful for that contribution," Trent replied with practiced sincerity. He finally looked up, his 34-year-old face carefully arranged into what he probably thought was compassionate professionalism. "But design is changing rapidly. We need someone who intuitively understands digital natives." "Someone younger, you mean?" I didn't phrase it as a question. Trent winced slightly. "Your severance is 6 months' salary. Very generous, considering the standard is 3. The company appreciates your years of service, Elena." Service. Like I'd been a loyal butler rather than the creative force that had built Nova Design from a boutique studio into one of the most respected firms in the industry. "Who's taking over?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Aiden Mitchell will be stepping up as creative director." Aiden, my protagonist. I'd hired him 5 years ago, fresh out of design school, talented but raw, with more confidence than experience. I'd mentored him, championed his ideas, helped him refine his considerable talents, and now he was taking my job. "I see," I said, gathering the termination papers. "Well, I won't take up any more of your valuable time." I stood smoothing my charcoal pencil skirt and headed for the door. Trent called after me, "Elena, I hope there are no hard feelings. This is just business." I paused, turning back with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Of course, Trent, it's just business." Walking through Nova's open concept workspace, all glass, steel, and carefully selected ergonomic furniture that I had personally approved, felt surreal. Designers and project managers glanced up as I passed, their expressions ranging from confusion to pity. News traveled fast in creative agencies. At my desk, my assistant Marco hovered anxiously. At 22, he was one of the youngest employees at Nova, brilliant with digital platforms and fiercely loyal. "Is it true?" he whispered, helping me gather personal items from my desk. "Afraid so. The company needs fresh vision," I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "That's bullshit," Marco said fiercely. "Everyone knows you're the reason the Richardson account chose Nova." I smiled at his loyalty. Apparently, experience has an expiration date in this industry. What will you do? He asked, handing me a framed photo of my daughter Mia and me at her college graduation last year. I haven't thought that far yet, I admitted. Though that wasn't entirely true. Something was already forming in the back of my mind, not fully formed, but a spark of an idea. Whatever it is, I want in, Marco said without hesitation. I studied him for a moment. Careful. You have a promising career ahead at Nova. A career copying trends instead of setting them, he scoffed. I came to Nova to learn from you, not from some algorithm-chasing hipster who thinks good design is whatever got the most likes last week. His passion reminded me of myself at his age, before mortgages and single parenthood had made me prioritize stability over risk. Before I'd given my best years to a company that discarded me the moment gray started appearing in my dark hair. I'll be in touch, I promised, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Outside, I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at Nova's sleek building with its award-winning architecture. I'd helped select the architect, had worked closely with him on creating a space that reflected our design philosophy. Now I was being forced out of it because, at 52, I was deemed too old to understand what modern clients wanted. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia. Dinner tonight? I have news. Mia, my brilliant daughter, 24 years old with dual degrees in business and computer science, already making waves at her tech company. I'd raised her alone after her father decided fatherhood didn't fit his lifestyle goals. She'd watched me climb the ranks at Nova, sacrificing evenings and weekends to prove myself again and again. Yes, my place at 7, I have news too. That evening I opened a bottle of wine as Mia set our dinner table. She looked so much like me at her age. The same dark eyes and olive skin, the same determined set to her jaw when she was processing something important. So what's your news? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Mia took a deep breath. I quit my job today. The wine bottle nearly slipped from my hand. You what? Why? I thought you loved working at Tech Fusion. I did at first, she said, taking the bottle from me to fill our glasses. But they keep sidelining my ideas. The project manager, this guy who's been there maybe 2 years longer than me, keeps taking credit for my work. When I called him out on it, he said I should be paying my dues before expecting recognition. The irony wasn't lost on me. Seems like we're both having career transitions. What do you mean? She asked, suddenly alert. I took a long sip of wine. Nova let me go today. Apparently, I'm not digitally intuitive enough for their evolving brand direction. What? Mia's outrage was immediate and fierce. After the Richardson campaign? After everything you've done for them? That's age discrimination, Mom. We should sue. I shook my head. And spend years in court while my career stagnates? No, I have a better idea. The spark that had been forming since I left Nova was catching fire now. Tell me more about that app concept you've been developing. Mia blinked, momentarily thrown by the change of subject. Designscape? It's an AI-assisted collaborative design platform. It would help teams create more cohesive brand experiences across different media. Why? Because I said, feeling more energized than I had in years, I think it's time I stopped building someone else's dream and started building my own. Our own. Mia's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You want to start a company, together. Think about it, I said, excitement building in my voice. Your technical expertise, my industry experience and connections. Your Designscape platform as our flagship product. We could create something that bridges the gap between traditional design excellence and digital innovation. Legacy design, Mia said immediately. That's what we'll call it. I raised an eyebrow. Legacy? Isn't that a bit old-fashioned for a tech-forward company? She grinned. That's the point. It honors experience while creating something new. A legacy isn't just about the past, it's about what endures and evolves. Plus, she added with a mischievous smile, it's a subtle middle finger to anyone who thinks expertise has an expiration date. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. To legacy design then. We clinked glasses, and just like that, a new chapter began. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of activity. I liquidated some investments for startup capital while reaching out to my extensive network of industry contacts. Many were surprisingly eager to help. It seemed I wasn't the only experienced professional troubled by the industry's youth obsession. Daniel Ramirez, a former client who now headed marketing at a major tech company, was one of the first to offer support. An agency that combines deep design experience with cutting-edge technology? Count me in. We've wasted too much money on pretty interfaces that don't actually solve business problems. Meanwhile, Mia refined her Designscape platform, working marathon coding sessions with Marco, who had indeed quit Nova 2 weeks after my departure. They were joined by Priya Sharma, a brilliant UX designer who'd been passed over for promotion at her previous company in favor of a younger, less experienced designer. We set up shop in a converted warehouse space, not the gleaming glass temple that Nova occupied, but a space with character, history, and most importantly, affordable rent. As word spread about what we were building, more talent came our way. Surprisingly, not all were industry veterans cast aside by youth-obsessed companies. Many were young designers and developers who were frustrated by shallow work environments that prioritized trends over substance. Jason Kim, a 26-year-old developer who joined us from one of the hottest digital agencies in the city, put it bluntly during his interview. "I'm tired of building flashy garbage that breaks the moment the client tries to actually use it. I want to learn how to create work that lasts." 6 months after being unceremoniously shown the door at Nova, I sat in our growing office reviewing the prototype of Designscape with Mia and our core team. The platform was revolutionary, combining AI-assisted design tools with collaboration features that solved real problems design teams face when working across different media. "We're ready for beta testing," Mia announced, pride evident in her voice. "I've lined up 5 companies willing to pilot the platform and provide feedback." "Make that 6, Marco interrupted, looking up from his computer. "Richardson Industries just reached out. They want to be included in the beta." I couldn't suppress a smile. Richardson, Nova's biggest client, was now interested in our product. "And that's not all," Marco continued, unable to contain his excitement. "There's a rumor going around that Nova is struggling with the Richardson account. Apparently, their fresh vision isn't translating into effective deliverables." "We're not building this company on Nova's failures," I reminded him, though I couldn't deny feeling a certain satisfaction. "We're building it on our own strengths." That philosophy guided us through our first year, while we kept tabs on Nova's increasingly desperate attempts to recapture their market position. Our focus remained on creating something truly innovative. Designscape moved from beta to full release, quickly gaining attention throughout the industry for its unique combination of intuitive interface and powerful capabilities. Legacy design grew rapidly but strategically. We hired based on talent and creative vision, not age or trendiness. Our office became a dynamic mix of experience levels, each team member valued for their unique contributions rather than how well they fit some arbitrary cultural mold. Then came the call I'd been both expecting and dreading. "Elena Gilbert," I answered, not recognizing the number. "Elena, it's Trent Sullivan." His voice sounded strained, nothing like the confident tone he used when terminating me. "I was hoping we could meet. There's a matter I'd like to discuss with you." "I'm quite busy these days, Trent," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Perhaps you could tell me what this is about." A pause. "It's about a potential collaboration between Nova and Legacy. We've been impressed with what you've built, especially the Designscape platform." "Collaboration," I repeated. Interesting term. And what exactly would this collaboration entail? Another pause, longer this time. "We should discuss the details in person. Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" Curiosity won out over petty satisfaction. "Fine. Giovanni's at 1 p.m. The following day, I arrived at Giovanni's, an upscale Italian restaurant that had been a favorite client meeting spot during my Nova days. Precisely on time. Trent was already there, nursing what looked like a double scotch despite the early hour. He'd aged visibly in the last 18 months, new lines etched around his eyes, his designer suit hanging slightly looser on his frame. "Elena," he stood, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting me." I shook it briefly before sitting down. "You mentioned a collaboration." He took a deep breath. "I'll be direct. Nova is struggling. We've lost Richardson and 3 other major accounts in the past 6 months. Aiden's direction has been problematic." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said neutrally, though I wasn't particularly sorry at all. "The board is considering drastic measures," he continued, "including a potential merger or acquisition." Your name came up repeatedly. I nearly choked on my water. You want Legacy to acquire Nova. We want to discuss the possibility of joining forces, he hedged, though his expression confirmed my interpretation. Your Designscape platform is exactly what our clients have been asking for, and your agency's reputation for combining innovation with solid design principles is precisely what Nova has lost. The irony was almost too perfect. The company that had discarded me for being too experienced was now seeking salvation from the very experience they had rejected. And what would my role be in this joint venture? I asked, already knowing I would decline but curious about how far Trent's desperation extended. You would lead the creative direction of the combined entity, he said without hesitation. The board recognizes that certain personnel decisions may have been hasty. Certain personnel decisions, I echoed. You mean firing me because I was too old to understand digital design, then watching as I built a more successful company specifically focused on digital design? Trent had the grace to look ashamed. We made a mistake, Helena. A serious misjudgment. I studied him for a long moment, remembering the humiliation of that day in his office, the severance papers, the condescending explanations about fresh vision. I'd appreciate your candor, Trent, but I'm not interested in acquiring Nova or merging with it. Legacy is doing quite well on its own trajectory. At least consider making a formal offer, he pressed. The Nova name still has value in our client list. What remains of it would complement your growing portfolio. I'll discuss it with my business partner. I conceded, though I already knew what Mia would say. But don't expect a quick decision. Back at Legacy's offices, I shared the lunch conversation with Mia in our conference room. They want us to buy them out. She laughed in disbelief. The same company that thought you were too old school to lead them. That's priceless. Karma has a certain poetry to it, I agreed. But we need to consider this from a business perspective, not a personal one. Mia sobered, shifting into the sharp business strategist I'd watched her become. Acquisitions are messy and expensive. We'd be taking on their overhead, their workplace culture issues, and whatever client problems cause their biggest accounts to leave. She shook her head. It doesn't make strategic sense for us. We're growing organically with a healthy culture and clients who specifically chose us for our approach. My thoughts exactly, I said, feeling a surge of pride in her clear-eyed analysis. But there might be value in cherry-picking some of their talent if they do go under. Mia's eyes lit up, including Aiden. I laughed. Now who's being petty? 2 weeks later, we gave Nova our official response. Legacy would not be pursuing an acquisition, but would be open to hiring selected team members if Nova's situation changed. The message was diplomatic but clear. We weren't interested in saving the company that had discarded me. 3 months after our meeting with Trent, Nova Design announced it was closing its doors after 32 years in business. The industry publication cited changing market conditions and increased competition in the digital space. But those who knew the real story understood. They had sacrificed accumulated wisdom on the altar of youth worship, and it had cost them everything. As former Nova employees began seeking new positions, we hired selectively, bringing on those whose portfolios showed genuine talent and who embraced our philosophy of blending experience with innovation. And yes, among them was Aiden Mitchell, the wonderkind who had replaced me as creative director. His interview was uncomfortable for both of us, his formerly boundless confidence replaced by humility born of failure. I made a massive mistake, Elena, he said frankly, not just accepting your position, but believing I could replace what you brought to Nova. The company needed evolution, not revolution. And what did you learn from that experience? I asked, neither warm nor cold, simply professional. That true innovation doesn't come from chasing trends or from discarding established wisdom. It comes from building on foundations while having the courage to experiment within frameworks that actually work. He met my eyes directly. I learned that 26 years of experience can't be replaced by enthusiasm, no matter how genuine. I considered him thoughtfully. Aiden was talented, that hadn't changed, and if he truly learned from Nova's implosion, he could be a valuable addition to Legacy. You'd be starting as a senior designer, not a director, I said finally. You'd need to earn any leadership position through demonstrated results and team collaboration. I understand, he said, relief evident in his voice. I'd welcome the opportunity to learn from you again, properly this time. 2 years after being told I was too experienced for the modern design landscape, I stood on a stage accepting the Industry Innovation Award for Designscape 2.0. Legacy Design had grown to 60 employees spread across 2 offices, with clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to cutting-edge startups. We had built something that genuinely bridged generational approaches to design, creating work that was both timeless and timely. In the audience, I could see Mia beaming with pride, along with our diverse team of designers, developers, and strategists. Aiden sat among them, now leading our digital experience team after 18 months of solid work and genuine growth as both a designer and a person. This award recognizes innovation, I said into the microphone. But what it really celebrates is the power of perspective, the kind that can only come from combining different experiences, backgrounds, and approaches. I paused, looking out at the industry that had once deemed me too old to contribute meaningfully. At Legacy, we believe great design isn't about age, young or old. It's about understanding both what changes and what endures. It's about recognizing that trends come and go, but principles of human connection remain constant. In the back of the room, I spotted Trent Sullivan, now working for a smaller agency across town. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave a small, acknowledging nod. The future of design belongs to those who value all voices at the table, from the seasoned veteran to the fresh graduate. Because innovation doesn't emerge from homogeneity, it springs from the creative tension between different perspectives. After the ceremony, at our celebration dinner, Mia raised her glass in a toast. To proving them wrong, she said with a grin. I shook my head, smiling as I raised my own glass. To proving ourselves right. We had done more than build a successful company. We had created a model that showed how experience and innovation could not just coexist, but strengthen each other. We had demonstrated that value doesn't diminish with age, it transforms and grows. And somewhere across town, I hoped the industry was learning that lesson, one client at a time. Gay Elost manuscript. The email from my stepmother arrived while I was grading freshman literature essays in my cramped office at Westfield Community College. Olivia, your father's estate is finally settled. The brownstone has sold. Harrison and I are dividing his personal effects this weekend. If there's anything specific you want, let me know by Friday. Otherwise, we'll assume you're not interested as usual. Victoria. I stared at the screen, the familiar mixture of grief and resentment churning in my stomach. My father had died 6 months ago, and this was the closest thing to a personal communication I'd received from Victoria since the funeral, where she'd introduced me to distant relatives as Robert's daughter from his first marriage. She teaches somewhere in Massachusetts. Not Dr. Olivia Blackwood, Associate Professor of Literature. Not published scholar of early American fiction. Just an afterthought, as I'd been for the 20 years since she'd married my father and given him Harrison, the son he'd always wanted. My name is Olivia Blackwood, 34, perpetually disappointing daughter of the renowned literary agent Robert Blackwood, who represented some of the most celebrated authors of the past 3 decades. I'd followed him into the world of literature, but not in the way he'd hoped. Instead of the prestigious publishing career he'd mapped out, I'd chosen academia, specifically the study of overlooked female writers of the early 19th century. Those obscure women scribblers he called my research focus at family dinners, writing domestic dramas that nobody remembered for a reason. I'd stopped attending those dinners after completing my doctorate. I typed a brief response to Victoria. I'd like to look through Dad's personal library and papers before anything is discarded. I can come Saturday morning. Her reply came almost immediately. Fine, 10 a.m. Harrison has already selected the valuable first editions for auction. Of course he had. My 26-year-old half-brother had followed perfectly in our father's footsteps, joining his literary agency straight out of his Ivy League education. He'd never read a book he couldn't monetize. That Saturday, I drove the 3 hours from western Massachusetts to my father's brownstone in Brooklyn. Now former brownstone, I reminded myself. The house where I'd grown up until my parents' divorce when I was 12 looked exactly as I remembered it. Imposing, elegant, filled with literary history. Victoria opened the door with an air kiss that didn't come within 6 inches of my cheek. Olivia, you look academic. I glanced down at my simple sweater and jeans. That would be because I am an academic. Harrison is in your father's study, cataloging. Most of the library has been boxed for donation, but you're welcome to look through it. She led me to the living room where dozens of cardboard boxes lined the walls. My heart sank as I realized I was looking at the dismantling of one of the finest private collections of American literature on the East Coast. You're donating all of this? There are probably rare editions. As I said, Victoria cut in. Harrison has already identified anything of actual value. The rest is just books. I bit back a response. To Victoria, my father's library had always been merely decorative, impressive shelving and leather bindings that complemented her interior design vision. That she couldn't tell the difference between a first edition Melville and a reading copy was something my father had found oddly charming. I'll start looking then. Don't take too long. The donation truck comes on Monday. Left alone, I began the overwhelming task of sifting through the box collection. Each carton I opened revealed more literary treasures. Not necessarily valuable in the monetary sense that would interest Harrison, but intellectually priceless. Annotated volumes with my father's distinctive marginalia, signed copies from authors he'd represented, books that had shaped American literary thought for generations. After an hour, Victoria appeared with coffee I hadn't asked for. Find anything worth keeping? The skepticism in her voice made clear she doubted I would. Actually, yes. I'd like to take these boxes. I gestured to several I'd set aside, containing works related to my research period and authors. She shrugged. Fine. Let me know when you're finished with your father's papers. Harrison needs to decide which client correspondence to retain for the agency archives. The study, my father's inner sanctum, was a wood-paneled room lined with built-in shelves that had once held his most prized literary possessions. Now it was half empty, with Harrison efficiently sorting through the remaining volumes and papers. The prodigal daughter returns, he said without looking up from his cataloging. Bit late, aren't you? Dad's been gone 6 months. Some of us don't have the luxury of dropping everything for extended bereavement leave, I replied. Community colleges aren't exactly generous with time off. Right, the noble pursuit of educating the masses. His tone made clear what he thought of my career choice. Well, don't get too comfortable. I've almost finished here. I looked around the room, memories flooding back. This was where I'd spent countless childhood hours, curled in the window seat with books while my father worked at his massive oak desk. It was where I'd first fallen in love with literature, long before it became a source of tension between us. What are you doing with his correspondence and manuscripts? I asked, noticing several bankers' boxes labeled client materials. Anything related to active clients comes to the agency. Personal correspondence goes to Victoria. The rest is trash. Trash? There could be important literary history in those papers. Harrison finally looked up, irritation clear on his face. If you're so concerned about literary history, maybe you should have shown more interest while Dad was alive. When was the last time you even spoke to him? His birthday? Christmas? The question stung because it contained a kernel of truth. Our relationship had been strained for years, our conversations perfunctory when they happened at all. But that didn't mean I hadn't cared. I like to look through his personal papers before anything is discarded, I said, ignoring his question. There may be materials relevant to my research. Your research on forgotten women writers nobody cares about. He rolled his eyes. Fine. Those boxes in the corner are headed for recycling. Knock yourself out, but anything you find related to his clients belongs to the agency. I spent the next several hours methodically sorting through decades of my father's notes, correspondence, and manuscripts. Most of it was mundane. Tax records, household files, correspondence with other agents and editors. Harrison periodically looked over my shoulder, making sure I wasn't pocketing anything of value to the agency. By late afternoon, with Victoria making increasingly unsubtle hints about needing to prepare for an evening engagement, I had filled my car with as many books and papers as it could hold. There was still so much to go through, but it would have to wait. I'll need to come back tomorrow, I told Victoria. That's not convenient. We have plans. Then I'll take more with me now and return what isn't relevant to my work. She sighed dramatically. Fine, but we need everything back or accounted for before the house closing next week. I loaded one final box into my trunk. A carton of mixed papers I hadn't had time to sort through properly, but that seemed to contain older material, possibly from before my father became a major agent. If nothing else, it would give me something to occupy my evening at the hotel. That night, sitting cross-legged on the hotel bed, I began sifting through the final box. Most of it was unremarkable, old contracts, letters from his early days in publishing, photographs from literary events in the 1980s and 90s. At the bottom of the box, however, I found something unexpected. A leather portfolio tied with faded ribbon, the kind used for manuscript submissions in the days before digital files. Inside was a typewritten manuscript titled Shadows of Salem by Elizabeth Gardner, dated 1988. I didn't recognize the author's name, but something about the manuscript intrigued me. The opening pages described a young woman in 1820s Massachusetts discovering her family's connection to the Salem witch trials. The prose was luminous, the historical details precise, the protagonist immediately compelling. I kept reading, unable to stop. Hours passed as I immersed myself in this unknown novel, the hotel room fading around me. By the time I reached the final page, dawn was breaking outside my window. The manuscript was extraordinary, a masterpiece of historical fiction that seamlessly blended actual events with a powerful narrative about women's autonomy, religious hypocrisy, and familial legacy. It was exactly the kind of work I studied in my research, yet I'd never heard of Elizabeth Gardner or this novel. More curious still, my father's notes were scrawled throughout the margins, enthusiastic comments that seemed completely at odds with his usual dismissal of women's fiction. On the final page he'd written, "Brilliant, revolutionary, will transform the genre." But if he'd thought so highly of it, why hadn't it been published? And who was Elizabeth Gardner? I searched online for any mention of the author or manuscript, but found nothing. The only Elizabeth Gardner who appeared in literary databases was an obscure poet who had published a single collection in the 1970s. The next morning, I arrived at the brownstone earlier than arranged, hoping for time to search for more information before Victoria and Harrison imposed their presence. To my surprise, Harrison was already in the study, efficiently filling a shredder with papers from one of the boxes I hadn't had time to examine. "What are you doing?" I demanded, horrified at the destruction of what might be important documents. "Cleaning up," he replied without pausing. "This is all ancient history from before Dad became successful. Nobody needs tax returns from 1985. I glanced at the papers feeding into the shredder. They weren't tax returns, they were letters, handwritten on personal stationery. "Stop, those aren't financial records. Those are personal letters. From nobody important," he said dismissively. I checked. I reached past him and pulled a half-shredded letter from the machine. The signature was still visible. "All I love, Elizabeth." My heart raced. Elizabeth Gardner. Harrison's expression changed subtly, a flicker of recognition quickly suppressed. "Never heard of her." He was lying. "I found her manuscript last night," I said, watching him carefully. "Shadows of Salem. Dad thought it was brilliant. Why wasn't it published?" "No idea what you're talking about." He reached for the letter in my hand, but I pulled it away. "You do know what happened to Elizabeth Gardner and her manuscript?" Before he could respond, Victoria appeared in the doorway. "What's going on? Why are you shouting?" I held up the manuscript I brought with me. "I found this last night, a novel by Elizabeth Gardner. Dad's notes suggest he thought it was extraordinary, but it was never published. I'm trying to understand why." Victoria's perfectly composed face went completely still. "Where did you get that?" "In a box of Dad's old papers." "Who was she, Victoria? Why wasn't this published?" Harrison and Victoria exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. "It's agency business," Harrison said finally. "Nothing to do with you. The manuscript is over 30 years old. Whatever agency business it was is long past. As a literary scholar, I'm interested in recovering important works, especially by female writers." "Whoa. It wasn't good enough," Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp. "Robert ultimately decided it wasn't marketable. These things happen all the time in publishing." But that directly contradicted my father's notes in the margins. Every comment suggested he believed it was not just publishable but potentially landmark. "I don't believe you," I said. "Dad's notes say the exact opposite. Something else happened." "What was it?" Victoria straightened her already perfect posture. "This is exactly why your father found you so difficult, Olivia. Always questioning, always challenging, never simply accepting his expertise. Elizabeth Gardner wasn't publishable. End of story. Then you won't mind if I research her further? Perhaps even prepare a scholarly edition of this manuscript." Harrison stepped forward. "Actually, we would mind." Any unpublished manuscript submitted to Dad's agency remains the intellectual property of the agency unless rights were explicitly returned to the author. That manuscript belongs to us. That's not how copyright works, and you know it, I countered. The rights belong to the author, not the agent. Unless you can produce a contract saying otherwise, Elizabeth Gardner or her estate owns this work. Fine, Harrison snapped. Good luck finding her. She disappeared 30 years ago, probably dead by now. His words confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. There was much more to this story than a simple rejection. What happened to her? I pressed. Why did she disappear? Victoria's icy composure finally cracked. Enough. This is ancient history that has nothing to do with you. Return the manuscript. It belongs with Robert's professional papers. I think I'll hold on to it while I try to locate Miss Gardner or her family, I said, tucking the portfolio under my arm. As a literary scholar, I have an ethical obligation to. As Robert's wife, Victoria cut in. I'm telling you to return it now. Something in her tone, a hint of panic beneath the anger, strengthened my resolve. I'll need to make a copy first, for my research. There will be no copies, Harrison said firmly. That manuscript is never going to see the light of day. Dad made that decision 30 years ago, and we're honoring it. Why? I demanded. What possible reason could there be to suppress an extraordinary work of literature for 3 decades? The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria and Harrison exchanged another look, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Victoria sighed. Robert's study. Now. Once the door was closed behind us, Victoria poured herself a generous measure of my father's expensive scotch, something I'd never seen her do before noon. Elizabeth Gardner was a pseudonym, she said after a long sip. The author's real name was Elizabeth Garner. The name meant nothing to me. Aunt. She was your mother, Harrison said flatly. The room seemed to tilt around me. What? That's not possible. My mother was a high school English teacher. She never wrote a novel. Oh, she wrote it, Victoria said, her voice bitter. And your father was going to publish it, make her a star. He just started his agency, and this was going to be his breakthrough book. Then why wasn't it published? What happened? Victoria looked away. She left, abandoned you and Robert without a word of explanation. Just disappeared one day while he was at a publishing lunch. He came home to find you alone in your playpen and a note saying she couldn't do it anymore. This contradicted everything I thought I knew about my childhood. My father had always told me my mother died in a car accident when I was 3. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking. Dad said she died. He showed me her grave. There is a grave, Harrison acknowledged reluctantly, but she wasn't in it. Robert created that fiction to protect you, and himself. It was easier than admitting she'd walked out on both of you. My mind was reeling. So the manuscript. He suppressed it, Victoria confirmed. He was so hurt, so angry when she abandoned you both. He couldn't bear the thought of making her famous after what she'd done. So he buried the manuscript and her memory along with it. But she was my mother. Why didn't he at least tell me the truth when I was old enough to understand? By then, the story was set, Harrison said with a shrug. And after he married my mother, it seemed better to leave the past buried. I clutched the manuscript tighter. And my mother. What actually happened to her? Victoria and Harrison exchanged another glance. We don't know, Victoria admitted. Robert hired a private investigator years ago, but the trail was cold. She simply vanished. Or he told you she did, I said, pieces beginning to fit together in my mind. Just like he told me she was dead when she wasn't. I left the brownstone in a daze, the manuscript secure in my bag, my world completely appended. The mother I'd mourned might still be alive. The father I thought I knew had constructed an elaborate fiction that had shaped my entire life. And in my hands I held my mother's voice, her thoughts, her art, her extraordinary talent that had never reached the world. Back at my hotel, I examined the manuscript with new eyes. The protagonist, a young woman discovering her family's hidden history, now seemed painfully autobiographical. Had my mother been writing about her own life in some way? Were there clues in these pages that might lead me to her, if she was still alive? I began searching more thoroughly, using academic databases and resources unavailable to casual researchers. Elizabeth Garner was a common enough name, but with my university credentials, I could access records most people couldn't. 3 days later, I canceled my return to Massachusetts. My classes would have to wait. I had tracked Elizabeth Garner to a small town in northern Vermont, where a woman by that name had been teaching at a local college for the past 20 years. Her faculty photo, though showing a woman 3 decades older than my childhood memories, had my eyes. My father's jawline, my grandmother's high cheekbones. The drive to Vermont took 6 hours, each mile increasing my anxiety. What would I say to this woman who might be my mother? What could possibly explain her abandonment of a 3-year-old child? And why had my father lied so completely, creating a fictional death rather than the painful truth? The small liberal arts college where she taught was nestled among rolling hills, its campus quiet on a Sunday afternoon. Her faculty profile listed her as a professor of English literature, specializing in 19th century American women writers. Like mother, like daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. I found her in her office, surrounded by books, grading papers much as I had been when Victoria's email arrived. The woman who looked up as I knocked on her open door had silver-streaked dark hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. Her eyes, my eyes, widened in shock. "Olivia," she whispered. Not a question, a recognition. "Elizabeth Garner?" I managed though I already knew the answer. "Yes." Her hands trembled as she set down her pen. "You found me." "I found your manuscript first," I said, pulling the portfolio from my bag. "Shadows of Salem, the novel Dad refused to publish after you left." She reached for it with reverent hands. "I never thought I'd see this again. I assumed Robert had destroyed it. He kept it, hidden away with everything else about you." Her eyes filled with tears, including the truth. "Why did you leave?" The question burst from me, all my prepared speeches forgotten. "How could you abandon your child?" "I didn't abandon you," she said, her voice breaking. "Robert took you from me." And so the real story emerged, piece by painful piece. There had been no abandonment, at least not the way Victoria and Harrison had described. My parents' marriage had been unraveling for months. My father's controlling behavior, his jealousy of my mother's literary talent, his growing resentment as publishing professionals began to show more interest in her work than his fledgling agency. The final break came when he presented her with an impossible choice: give up writing or give up her family. When she refused both options, he'd locked her out of their home while she was at a meeting with another agent who had expressed interest in her manuscript. By the time she returned, my father had filed emergency custody papers, claiming she was mentally unstable and had threatened to harm herself and me. It was the 1980s, she explained, tears streaming down her face. "I had no money for legal fees. Your father had powerful friends in New York. The temporary custody order became permanent. Every time I tried to fight it, he threatened to have me institutionalized. Eventually, I had to leave to rebuild some kind of life. But I never stopped trying to reach you. I never received anything from you. No letters, no calls, nothing. I sent hundreds of letters over the years. Birthday cards, Christmas gifts. Robert must have intercepted them all." She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a thick folder. "I kept copies. I couldn't bear the thought that you might someday believe I hadn't tried." Inside were carbon copies of letters dating back to 1988, continuing all the way to my college graduation, which she'd attended from a distance, watching her daughter receive a diploma without being able to approach her. "Why didn't you try to find me when I was an adult? Once I was beyond his control." "I did," she said simply. 5 years ago, I wrote to you at your university. I received a cease and desist letter from Robert's attorney in response, threatening a restraining order if I made any further attempts to contact you. 5 years ago, when I begun my doctoral research on overlooked female writers, when my relationship with my father had deteriorated to nearly nothing, the timing couldn't be coincidental. He knew I was studying women's literature. He was afraid I might stumble onto your manuscript, make the connection." She nodded. "It would have unraveled everything. His story about my death, his suppression of my work, the custody battle. Your father built his entire reputation on discovering and nurturing literary talent. Imagine the scandal if it became known that his first act as an agent was to bury what might have been a major work because of personal vengeance." I thought about the man I'd known, successful, respected, but perpetually disappointed in his academically inclined daughter who studied obscure women scribblers. Had he seen my mother in me all along? Had my choice of specialization been some unconscious attempt to find her? "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Elizabeth, my mother, looked down at the manuscript between us. That depends on you. I've spent 30 years believing my only child thought I was dead or had willingly abandoned her. Finding out that you're not only alive, but following a similar academic path. It's more than I ever hoped for. And the manuscript? It's extraordinary work. It deserves to be published. After all this time, she gave a sad smile. The publishing world has moved on. Historical fiction about the Salem witch trials is hardly groundbreaking anymore. But recovering a suppressed work by a female author, especially under these circumstances, that's exactly the kind of literary discovery that scholars in my field live for. I hesitated, then added, we could work on it together. A scholarly edition with an introduction explaining its history and significance. Something kindled in her eyes, hope, perhaps, or the rekindling of an old dream. You would want to do that. After everything? I've spent my career trying to ensure forgotten female voices are heard, I said. Starting with yours seems fitting. 6 months later, I stood at a podium in a crowded university auditorium, introducing the speaker for our department's distinguished literary lecture series. Beside me sat Victoria Harrison and several of my father's former colleagues, all subpoenaed to attend as part of the settlement we'd reach after the truth about my mother's manuscript came to light. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, I said to the audience of students, faculty, and literary professionals. Dr. Elizabeth Garner, whose recently recovered manuscript Shadows of Salem has been described by Publishers Weekly as a lost masterpiece of American historical fiction. Following its publication next month by Reclamation Press, Dr. Garner will be teaching a special seminar here on women's voices in early American literature. As my mother took the podium to enthusiastic applause, I caught Victoria's eye in the front row. Her face was rigid with barely contained fury, not at the humiliation of being forced to witness this triumph, but because the settlement had included financial compensation that had decimated what remained of my father's estate. Beside her, Harrison looked merely defeated. His agency was struggling in the wake of the scandal that had erupted when the story broke about how his father had suppressed a major literary work out of personal vengeance. Several clients had already left for other representation. My mother began her reading, her voice strong and clear as she shared the words she'd written 3 decades earlier, words that had been hidden away, like she had been, like the truth had been. I'd spent my career searching for lost female voices in American literature, never imagining the most significant recovery would be so deeply personal. The manuscript hadn't just restored a potentially important literary work to public view. It had restored my mother to me, and with her, a more complete understanding of my own history and identity. As I listened to her read, I reflected on how thoroughly my father had constructed the narrative of our family, deciding which voices would be heard and which would be silenced. He had been the agent in every sense of the word, controlling the story from beginning to end. But stories have a way of resisting suppression. Words find their way to the surface, like buried seeds pushing through soil toward the light. And sometimes, the most powerful literary recovery isn't found in an archive or forgotten library, but in the spaces between the stories we're told about ourselves and the truths waiting to be discovered. After the lecture, as my mother signed copies of advanced readers' editions for an enthusiastic crowd, I stood slightly apart, watching this woman who had been both stranger and ghost to me for 30 years. Victoria approached, her designer handbag clutched like armor. "You've destroyed everything your father built," she said quietly. Was it worth it? I considered the question carefully. Dad built his career by controlling narratives, deciding which stories deserved to be told and which didn't. I'm simply continuing the family business, but with different criteria. He protected you, she insisted. Created a story that was easier than the messy truth. He protected himself, I corrected. And in doing so, he denied me my mother and the world a remarkable literary voice. That's not protection, it's control. Victoria's gaze shifted to where my mother was engaged in animated conversation with the department chair. She abandoned both of you. Whatever Robert's faults, he was the parent who stayed. That's still his version of the story, I said. I've chosen to hear hers as well before deciding what to believe. Later that evening, over dinner with my mother in my small faculty apartment, I showed her the final cover design for our book, Shadows of Salem by Elizabeth Garner, with a critical introduction by Dr. Olivia Blackwood. The subtitle read, a recovered masterpiece of American literary history. It's really happening, she said, tracing the cover with her fingertip. After all these years. Not exactly how you imagined it, I'm sure. She smiled, a smile I was still getting used to seeing, still finding echoes of in my own mirror. No, it's better. The book is important, but finding you again. That's the real recovery. We talked late into the night, continuing the process of bridging 30 years of separation. There were still gaps to fill, wounds that might never fully heal. But we had begun the work of reclamation, of her story, of our relationship, of the truth. In my field, literary recovery is painstaking work, piecing together fragments, contextualizing lost voices, bringing forgotten narratives back into the canon. I never expected to apply those same scholarly techniques to my own life, recovering not just a manuscript, but an entire history that had been deliberately obscured. As my mother prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Your father wasn't wrong about everything, you know. He always said you were stubborn, persistent, unwilling to accept simple answers. He didn't mean those as compliments. Perhaps not, she acknowledged. But those are precisely the qualities that led you to find me, to uncover the manuscript, to insist on the truth. Sometimes the traits parents find most challenging in their children are exactly what those children need to become their true selves. After she left, I sat at my desk, surrounded by the scholarly apparatus of our forthcoming book, footnotes, historical context, literary analysis. But my mind was on the broader implications of what we had uncovered. How many other voices have been silenced over the years? How many manuscripts lay forgotten in attics or basements, suppressed by those with the power to control which stories reached the public? And how many other families were shaped by narratives as carefully constructed as the one my father had created? I couldn't answer those questions for others, but for myself, for my mother, for the remarkable manuscript that had brought us together again, I could ensure that this particular story finally reached the audience it deserved. Sometimes the most important scholarly work begins with the most personal questions, and sometimes finding a lost manuscript leads to recovering much more than words on a page. The call from my uncle's lawyer came on a Tuesday morning while I was in the middle of debugging code that would eventually revolutionize quantum computing, the same code my family had mocked as a glorified calculator for the past 5 years. Mr. Calloway, I regret to inform you that your uncle, Edward Thornton, passed away yesterday evening. I stared out the window of my modest apartment at the university campus where I worked as an unremarkable assistant professor. Unremarkable, my father's word, not mine. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuine sadness mixing with surprise. Uncle Edward had been the only family member who'd ever shown interest in my work. Mr. Thornton's will stipulate that you attend the reading tomorrow at our offices in Boston. All beneficiaries must be present. I almost laughed. Beneficiaries? My name and inheritance had never appeared in the same sentence in my family. My name is Daniel Calloway, 32, perpetual disappointment to the illustrious Thornton Calloway financial dynasty. While my cousins have followed the family path into investment banking and hedge funds, I'd chosen theoretical physics and computer science. An unforgivable detour from the family legacy. I'll be there, I told the lawyer, already mentally rearranging my lectures and lab time. That evening, my phone lit up with a text from my cousin Victor. Heard about the will reading. Don't get your hopes up, Danny. Uncle Edward was just being polite, including you. Victor had been the golden child since we were boys. Captain of the lacrosse team, Harvard Business School, summer internships at Goldman Sachs. Now he managed the family's primary investment fund, which my father and aunt had entrusted to him despite his mediocre track record. I didn't bother responding. Victor's taunts had lost their sting somewhere around the time I'd published my third peer-reviewed paper on quantum algorithmic stability. The next day, I sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Harrington and Associates, distinctly underdressed in my university blazer among my family's bespoke suits. My father, Thomas Calloway, barely acknowledged my presence with a curt nod. My Aunt Elizabeth studied her manicure. Victor and his sister Claudia whispered to each other, occasionally glancing in my direction with poorly concealed smirks. Uncle Edward had been the family's eccentric outlier, brilliant with numbers but uninterested in the flashy wealth that obsessed the rest of them. He'd made his fortune in advanced statistical analysis for financial markets, then retired early to pursue his passion for pure mathematics and theoretical physics, which explained our occasional lunches and his curious questions about my research. Morton Harrington, a silver-haired attorney with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat and began reading a will. To my sister Elizabeth and my brother-in-law Thomas, I leave my vacation properties in the Hamptons and Martha's Vineyard, along with the sum of $1 million each. My father and aunt exchanged satisfied glances, exactly what they'd expected. To my niece Claudia, I leave my collection of art and antiquities, valued at approximately $4 million. Claudia brushed imaginary lint from her channel suit, her expression suggesting this was merely her due. To my nephew Victor, I leave my membership shares in the Sterling Club and my vintage car collection. Victor's smile faltered slightly. The assets were valuable, certainly, but nowhere near what he clearly anticipated. The remainder of my estate, continued Harrington, including my primary residence, investment holdings, and controlling interest in Thornton Analytics, I leave to my nephew, Daniel Calloway, contingent upon certain conditions. The room went silent, then erupted. "This is absurd," my father sputtered, his face reddening. "Daniel knows nothing about running a company." "There must be a mistake," Aunt Elizabeth insisted, leaning forward. "Edward wouldn't leave the bulk of his estate to the family disappointment?" I offered quietly. Harrington raised a hand for silence. "The bequest comes with specific conditions, as I mentioned. Mr. Thornton left a letter explaining everything. He handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in Uncle Edward's precise handwriting." "What conditions?" Victor demanded. "What's in that letter?" "That's between Mr. Thornton and Daniel," Harrington replied firmly. "Now, regarding the distribution of assets. How much?" My father's voice cut through the attorney's explanation. "How much is he getting?" Harrington consulted his papers, though I suspected he knew the figure by heart. "Mr. Thornton's total estate, excluding the specific bequests already mentioned, is valued at approximately $87 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. My cousin stared at me with naked shock and resentment. "This is ridiculous," Victor finally said. "Uncle Edward was clearly not in his right mind. We'll contest the will." Mr. Thornton underwent thorough psychological evaluation when he updated his will 6 months ago. Harrington countered smoothly. "The documentation is impeccable. Additionally, there's a no contest clause. Any beneficiary who challenges the will forfeits their inheritance entirely." Victor subsided, though fury still radiated from him. The meeting concluded with details about asset transfers and paperwork. Throughout it all, I sat quietly, the unopened letter burning a hole in my pocket. As we prepared to leave, my father approached me for the first time in over a year. "Whatever game Edward was playing, this company is beyond your capabilities," he said, his voice low. "You should sell your shares to Victor. They'll give you fair market value." I met his gaze steadily. "I haven't even read Uncle Edward's letter yet. Maybe I should do that before making any decisions." "Don't be stubborn, Daniel. You're a researcher, not a businessman." "I'm actually many things, Dad. You just never bothered to find out what they were." Back in my apartment that evening, I finally opened the letter. Uncle Edward's familiar handwriting filled several pages. "My dear Daniel, if you're reading this, I've finally managed to escape the tedious board meetings and charity galas that consumed far too much of my life. Don't be too sad. By the time you receive this, I'll have already embarked on the ultimate intellectual adventure. You're wondering why I've left you the bulk of my estate when I could have followed family tradition and bestowed it upon the proper heirs. The answer is simple. You're the only one who might understand what to do with it. For the past 3 years, I've been watching your research with growing interest. Your work in quantum algorithmic systems isn't just brilliant, it's revolutionary, but you've been solving only half the equation. The other half is at Thornton Analytics. My company hasn't just been analyzing financial markets. We've been collecting and processing data on a scale few organizations can match. The patterns we've identified, combined with your quantum computing approaches, could change everything. Your inheritance comes with 2 conditions. First, you must not sell your shares in Thornton Analytics for at least 1 year. Second, you must review the research files in my home office safe, accessible with the enclosed key. The combination is the publication date of your first paper on quantum algorithmic stability. Your family will pressure you to sell. They'll belittle your abilities and question your competence. They've been doing this your entire life, so I imagine you're quite used to it by now. What they don't understand, what they've never understood, is that true wealth isn't measured in acquisitions or social status. It's measured in ideas. And you, Daniel, have the most valuable ideas of anyone I've ever met. Do what you think is right, but know this. I didn't leave you my company because you're my nephew. I left it to you because you're the only person I trust with its future. With confidence in your judgment, Edward. I stared at the letter for a long time, then at the small key that had fallen from the envelope. I hadn't cried when I'd heard of Uncle Edward's death. Our relationship, while friendly, hadn't been particularly close. But reading his words, understanding his faith in my work, brought tears to my eyes. My phone began buzzing with messages from family members, alternating between congratulations and thinly veiled suggestions that I saw my unexpected windfall. I ignored them all. The next morning, I drove to Uncle Edward's estate in Cambridge, my estate now, according to Harrington. The sprawling Victorian mansion was impressive but understated, much like Edward himself. The housekeeper greeted me with a knowing smile, as if she'd been expecting me for years rather than hours. "Professor Calloway," she said, "Mr. Thornton said you'd be coming. His office is ready for you." Uncle Edward's home office occupied the entire third floor, a vast space filled with books, mathematical models, and computer equipment far more sophisticated than I'd expected. The safe was hidden behind a sliding panel in the bookcase, just as his letter had described. The combination worked on the first try. Inside was a single external hard drive and another note. "The password is the theorem you explained to me over lunch last spring. The one that made me spill my wine." I smiled at the memory. I'd been explaining a particularly elegant solution to a quantum decoherence problem, and Edward had become so excited he'd knocked over his glass, staining the white tablecloth crimson. The hard drive contained terabytes of data, financial records, market analyses, communication patterns, resource distributions, collected over decades. At first glance, it seemed like standard analytical research, albeit extraordinarily comprehensive. But as I dug deeper, I began to see what Edward had meant about the other half of the equation. His company hadn't just been tracking financial patterns. They'd been modeling complex systems interactions on a global scale. Climate variables, population movements, resource allocations, technological development curves, all interconnected in a vast dynamic model. And the model was showing severe instabilities. According to Edward's projections, the global financial system was heading toward a catastrophic failure point within the next 18 to 24 months. Not just a recession or market correction, but a fundamental structural collapse that would make the 2008 financial crisis look like a minor hiccup. More disturbing still, several major investment firms, including the Calloway Family Fund managed by Victor, were engaged in exactly the high-risk strategies that would accelerate and amplify the coming crash. I spent the entire day and most of the night analyzing Edward's data, confirming his conclusions with my own calculations. By dawn, I was convinced he was right. The system was far more fragile than anyone realized, and the coming crash would be devastating. But there was something else. In his notes, Edward had speculated that my quantum algorithmic approach might offer a solution, a way to identify and strengthen the weak points in the system before collapse became inevitable. He hadn't worked out the details. That, apparently, was my inheritance. My phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the night. As the sun rose, I finally checked it. Dozens of missed calls and messages from family members, each more insistent than the last. The most recent was from Victor. "Board meeting at Thornton Analytics tomorrow at 10 a.m. Attendance mandatory for major shareholders. Time to discuss the company's future." They weren't wasting any time. I arrived at Thornton Analytics headquarters the next morning to find the boardroom already filled with tense, expectant faces. Victor sat at the head of the table, a position he'd apparently assigned himself. My father and aunt flanked him, with various board members and executives filling the remaining seats. "Ah, the prodigal nephew arrives," Victor said with a tight smile. "We were just discussing transition strategies." "Transition to what?" I asked, taking the only empty seat at the opposite end of the table from Victor. "Practical leadership," my father answered. "Edward's bequest, while well-intentioned, has placed the company in an untenable position. You have no experience in finance or corporate management." We've prepared a very generous offer, Victor continued, sliding a folder toward me. Well above market value for your shares. You'll be set for life, and the company will continue under experienced leadership. I didn't open the folder. Instead, I placed my own laptop on the table and connected it to the room's display system. Before we discuss any offers, I'd like to share something Uncle Edward left for me. Something that affects not just Thornton Analytics, but the entire financial market, including the Callaway Family Fund. Victor's smile faltered. That's not on the agenda. I'm making it the agenda, I replied, typing commands to bring up Edward's model, integrated with my own algorithms. According to Edward's research that this company has been conducting for years, we're heading toward a systemic financial collapse within the next 2 years. Nervous glances circulated around the table. One of the executives leaned forward. What kind of collapse are we talking about? Global, comprehensive, and accelerated by exactly the kind of high-risk derivatives trading that the Callaway Fund has engaged in over the past 18 months. My father's face darkened. This is absurd. You're a physicist, not a financial analyst. Actually, I'm both now, I said. And Edward's data is conclusive. The modeling shows a 94% probability of cascading system failure beginning in the banking sector and rapidly spreading to commodities, currencies, and equity markets. I guided them through the model, explaining the interlocking factors and feedback loops that were creating an unprecedented vulnerability in the global financial structure. Several board members, particularly those with technical backgrounds, grew increasingly concerned as the presentation continued. Even if this model is accurate, Victor interjected, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. What exactly do you propose we do about it? That's where my research comes in, I said, bringing up a new set of simulations. By applying quantum algorithmic principles to market structures, we can identify and strengthen critical stability points before the collapse begins. Quantum algorithms? For financial markets? Victor scoffed. This is exactly why you shouldn't be running this company. You're trying to turn it into your personal research playground. Actually, one of the senior analysts spoke up. I've been following Professor Callaway's published work. His approaches to system stability are quite remarkable. If they could be applied to financial systems. They can, I confirmed. Edward saw the connection before I did. That's why he left me the company, not because I'm his nephew, but because combining my research with Thornton Analytics' data and market position creates a unique opportunity. An opportunity to do what, exactly? My father demanded. To prevent a global financial meltdown, I replied simply, and to position Thornton Analytics as the leader in a new approach to market stability and risk management. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Several board members were already pulling up my published papers on their tablets, connecting the dots Edward had seen months ago. Victor attempted one last offensive. This is all theoretical. You're asking us to bet the company's future on unproven academic models. No, I said quietly. I'm telling you, as a majority shareholder, that this is the direction Thornton Analytics will take under my leadership. Those who don't share this vision are welcome to tender their resignations. The meeting concluded without Victor's share purchase being discussed again. As the board members filed out, many of them already engaged in intense discussions about the implications of what I presented, my father lingered behind. You really believe this collapse is coming? He asked, his voice lacking its usual certainty. The data is conclusive, I replied, and we're uniquely positioned to address it if we act quickly. He studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Edward always said you were the smartest one in the family. I thought he was just being kind. You never bothered to find out. He nodded slowly. Perhaps it's time I did. Over the next 6 months, Thornton Analytics underwent a dramatic transformation under my leadership. We pivoted from pure financial analysis to developing what we called quantum-resilient financial architecture, a framework for identifying and strengthening critical stability points in financial systems using principles derived from my quantum computing research. At first, the financial community viewed our approach with skepticism. But as our models began accurately predicting market microcorrections that traditional analytics missed, institutions started paying attention. By the 8-month mark, we were consulting for central banks and global financial institutions on stability mechanisms. Victor resigned from Thornton Analytics but remained at the helm of the Callaway Family Fund, stubbornly dismissing my warnings about their investment strategies. My father, surprisingly, began taking an interest in my work, occasionally sitting in on technical briefings and asking increasingly insightful questions. Then came the first tremors of the crash we predicted. A mid-sized investment bank in Europe collapsed overnight due to exposure to exactly the kind of complex derivatives our model had flagged as high risk. The contagion spread rapidly, just as we projected. But the institutions that had implemented our stability protocols weathered the initial shock. As the crisis accelerated, our client list grew exponentially. We weren't just analyzing the crash, we were actively helping to contain it. The Callaway Family Fund wasn't so fortunate. Victor had ignored my warnings, doubling down on high-risk positions that were now imploding spectacularly. In a single week, the fund lost 60% of its value. My father called me late one night, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "Victor's asking for your help. The fund is in free fall." "I tried to help 6 months ago," I reminded him. He wasn't interested. "That was before. This is now. This is the family legacy, Daniel." I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn recognition from a family that considered my work irrelevant. The dismissive comments, the missed graduations, the constant comparison to cousins who fit the family mold. "I'll see what I can do," I finally said, not for Victor, but for the family members who would be devastated by the fund's collapse. The next day, I met Victor in his now somber office, surrounded by terminal screens displaying cascading losses. "I suppose you're enjoying this," he said by way of greeting. "I take no pleasure in being right about a financial catastrophe," I replied. "But yes, there's a certain irony in you asking for my help after all these years of mockery." He stared at the screens, defeat written in the slump of his shoulders. "Can you help? Or did you just come to witness the downfall?" "I can help," I said, opening my laptop. "But things will change. The fund will need to adopt the stability protocols we've developed, and you'll need to resign as manager." His head snapped up. "You want control of the family fund too?" "I don't want control of anything, Victor. I want stability in a system that's been dangerously imbalanced for too long. In the financial markets and in our family." In the end, Victor agreed to my terms, not out of respect for my expertise, but out of desperation to salvage what remained of his reputation. The Callaway Family Fund was restructured under Thornton Analytics guidance, its high-risk positions unwound, its investment strategy realigned with the stability principles I developed. 1 year after Uncle Edward's will reading, I stood at the podium of the International Financial Summit, addressing central bankers, treasury secretaries, and financial leaders from around the world. The subject: how quantum algorithmic principles were reshaping our understanding of financial stability in a complex global system. My father sat in the front row, genuinely attentive for perhaps the first time in my life. Beside him was Dr. Eleanor Chen, the brilliant quantum physicist who had joined Thornton Analytics as our research director and who had, more recently, begun joining me for dinners that extended far beyond professional discussions. As I explained the elegant mathematics behind our stability protocols, I thought about Uncle Edward's letter. True wealth isn't measured in acquisitions or social status. It's measured in ideas. He had been right, of course. But he left out something important. Ideas only achieve their full value when they're implemented, when they move from theoretical possibility to practical reality, when they change not just how we think, but how we live. My inheritance hadn't really been Uncle Edward's money or his company. It had been his confidence that my ideas mattered, that they could change things that needed changing. As I concluded my presentation to enthusiastic applause, I noticed Victor standing at the back of the hall. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave a small, reluctant nod of acknowledgement. Not quite respect, perhaps, but recognition. Sometimes that's enough. Later that evening, as Eleanor and I walked through the gardens of the conference center, she asked the question that had been on her mind all day. Was it worth it? Saving the family that never appreciated you? I considered this as we paused by a fountain, its waters catching the evening light. "I didn't do it for appreciation," I said finally. "I did it because it was the right application of the right idea at the right time. And the family recognition, your father's newfound respect, Victor's grudging acknowledgement?" I smiled, thinking of all the years I craved exactly those things. They're like compound interest, nice to have, but not the principle I was investing in. Eleanor laughed, linking her arm through mine as we continued our walk. Professor Calloway, I do believe you've been spending too much time in the financial world. You're speaking in banking metaphors now. Maybe I agreed, or maybe I've just finally solved the inheritance equation, figuring out what to keep, what to transform, and what to leave behind. The real inheritance, after all, hadn't been what Uncle Edward left to me. It had been what I chose to build with it. And that was a calculation I'd gotten exactly right. After 10 years of groundbreaking research under my direction, I'm proud to announce that Revitalize Pharmaceuticals has developed the first effective treatment for Geller's syndrome. Dr. Richard Harlow announced to the crowd of medical journalists, pharmaceutical executives, and FDA representatives gathered in the hotel ballroom. This devastating neurological condition has been a death sentence for the 5,000 Americans diagnosed each year. Today, that changes. I stood at the back of the room, clipboard pressed against my chest like armor, watching the man who had spent less than 10 hours in our actual research lab take credit for my life's work. The molecular structure projected on the massive screen behind him, the one he was gesturing to with such confident authority, had been sketched on a coffee shop napkin during my second year of postdoctoral research, long before I'd even joined Revitalize. My name is Dr. Eliza Kwan, and this is the story of how a revolutionary medical breakthrough, and the system that almost buried it, changed far more than just the lives of Geller's syndrome patients. The brilliance of compound RVT 773, Harlow continued, using the corporate designation rather than the molecular name I'd given it, lies in its ability to cross the blood-brain barrier and selectively inhibit the protein misfolding that triggers neurodegeneration in Geller's patients. A medical correspondent from The Lancet raised her hand. Dr. Harlow, the molecular mechanism you're describing is remarkably similar to Dr. Kwan's published theoretical work from her time at Johns Hopkins. Was her research a starting point for this treatment? Harlow's practiced smile didn't falter. Dr. Kwan is a valued member of our extended research team. Her early theoretical models provided some interesting avenues to explore, though they required significant refinement to become clinically viable. Some interesting avenues, refinement. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my expression neutral. What he didn't mention was that the extended research team consisted almost entirely of me and 3 dedicated lab assistants working 80-hour weeks in a basement lab, chronically underfunded until our breakthrough made the treatment too promising to ignore. Could we hear from Dr. Kwan directly? Asked the journalist, scanning the room. Dr. Kwan is more comfortable in the lab than in the spotlight, Harlow answered smoothly. She's actually already back at Revitalize, working on the next generation of the compound. Science never sleeps. The lie was so brazen I almost laughed. I was standing less than 50 feet away from him, deliberately positioned in the back where marketing thought I wouldn't be noticed. But the journalist's gaze found me anyway, recognition flickering across her face as she spotted the name on my badge. I gave a small nod, confirming her suspicion, and watched as she made a note in her tablet. The seed was planted. After the presentation, as Harlow was surrounded by pharmaceutical executives discussing distribution rights worth billions, I slipped away to the hotel bar. My phone lit up with a message from Deepak, one of my lab assistants. Did he at least mention your name this time? I typed back, as a member of the extended research team whose work required significant refinement. Bastard, when do we activate Phase 2? I smiled at the message. Phase 2. It sounded like something from a spy movie, but it was actually a carefully planned strategy devised in the darkest moment of our research journey, the day Harlow had tried to remove me from the project entirely. Tonight, send the package to Lydia Chen at The Lancet, the one with revengestory. I ordered another drink and pulled up the secure cloud folder on my phone, the one that contained our insurance policy. For 3 years, I had documented every step of our research with obsessive precision. Lab notes, molecular modeling simulations, clinical trial data, and correspondence. But most importantly, I had evidence of Harlow's systematic attempts to minimize, claim, and eventually eliminate my contributions. There were recorded meetings where he couldn't answer basic questions about his breakthrough molecule. Emails where he admitted not understanding the core mechanisms but insisted on being listed as primary researcher. documentation showing how research funds were reallocated to ensure his name appeared prominently in clinical trial protocols. And then there was the smoking gun, his explicit directive to remove my name from the patent application, followed by his recommendation for my reassignment to a different department once the treatment proved successful in Phase A trials. What Harlow didn't know was that I had filed for a separate patent 9 months earlier, not for RVT 773 itself, which legally belonged to Revitalize, but for the entire class of molecules based on my original theoretical model. A model I had published before joining the company, which gave me certain intellectual property rights that Revitalize's legal team had overlooked in their rush to claim ownership of everything. The Lancet journalist, Lydia Chen, appeared at the bar beside me, ordering a sparkling water before turning in my direction. "Dr. Kwan, I thought you were back at the lab, making scientific history," she said with a wry smile. "Apparently I'm capable of being in 2 places at once, another breakthrough Dr. Harlow will no doubt take credit for." She laughed, then lowered her voice. Off the record, that presentation was a scientific travesty. He couldn't answer half the technical questions without deferring to notes that looked suspiciously like they were written in someone else's handwriting. "Mine, actually," I confirmed. "He has a habit of having me prepare his talking points, which he then reads without understanding." "Would you like to set the record straight?" she asked. The Lancet would be very interested in the actual science behind this breakthrough. I glanced toward the ballroom, where Harlow was still holding court, basking in the acclaim for my work. "You'll be receiving a package from my lab assistant," I said carefully. "Everything is meticulously documented and can be independently verified. But there's more at stake here than just scientific credit, such as 5,000 jealous patients per year in the U.S. alone. Revitalize plans to price the treatment at $850,000 per patient, but my broader patent could allow for generic manufacturing at a fraction of that cost." Her eyes widened. That would be billions in lost revenue for Revitalize, and thousands of lives saved who couldn't afford the treatment otherwise, I added. "That's what really matters to me." The next morning, I arrived at Revitalize's research campus to find an unusual flurry of activity. Security guards I didn't recognize stood near the entrance to the executive wing, and there was a tension in the air that reminded me of the day our Phase I trial results had been unblinded. My lab keycards still worked, which I found vaguely surprising. I half expected to have been locked out overnight. My team was already there, looking nervous but determined. "It started," Deepak said quietly as I entered, nodding toward his computer. On the screen was the front page of the Lancet's website, featuring a breaking news story. Questions emerge about Revitalize's revolutionary jealous treatment. Who really developed RVT 773? The article was comprehensive, citing multiple sources within Revitalize who confirmed that I had been the primary researcher and developer of the treatment, with Harlow taking credit despite minimal involvement in the actual science. But more explosive was the revelation about my separate patent application, which threatened Revitalize's exclusive control over what analysts were already projecting as a $4.2 billion annual market. My phone began ringing almost immediately, first Revitalize's legal department, then the head of PR, and finally Harlow himself. I let them all go to voicemail. Instead, I focused on finalizing my documentation for the most important meeting of my career, scheduled for 2:00 p.m. that afternoon. Not with Revitalize executives, but with representatives from Madison Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and the World Health Organization. "Dr. Kwan," the sharp voice startled me from my preparations. Richard Harlow stood in the doorway of my lab, his face flushed with anger. "What have you done?" I looked up calmly. "Currently, I'm preparing for a meeting about global access to life-saving medications. But I assume you're referring to the Lancet article. This is a direct violation of your employment contract and confidentiality agreements," he sputtered. "We'll sue you into oblivion." "Everything in that article is factually accurate and independently verifiable," I replied. "But you're welcome to explain to a jury why you attempted to remove the actual inventor from her own research project." "The research belongs to Revitalize," he insisted. "We funded it." "Partially," I agreed, after repeatedly cutting our budget and almost shutting us down 3 times. But more importantly, my broader molecular patent was filed based on work I did before joining Revitalize, which gives me certain rights you can't simply erase. His face darkened. The board has called an emergency meeting. You're suspended pending investigation. That's your prerogative, I said, gathering my materials. But you might want to consider a different approach. My meeting with MSF and WHO this afternoon could determine whether Revitalize maintains any role in the global distribution of this treatment. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. What meeting? What are you talking about? I'm discussing a licensing arrangement that would allow generic manufacturing of the broader class of molecules covered by my patent. Not just RVT 773, but several variants that are equally effective and would circumvent Revitalize's specific patent. The implication was clear. While Revitalize owned the rights to the specific compound we had developed, my broader patent could open the door to similar treatments that would shatter their monopoly. You destroy billions in shareholder value over a credit dispute? He asked incredulously. This isn't about credit, Dr. Harlow. It's about access. Revitalize plans to price this treatment beyond the reach of most patients who need it. I won't allow my work to save only the wealthy. Before he could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed the CEO's name. With a final glare in my direction, he answered and walked away. My meeting with MSF and WHO representatives went exactly as planned. I presented not only the scientific basis for the treatment, but also a framework for licensing my patent to generic manufacturers in exchange for a modest royalty that would be reinvested in further research. By the time I returned to Revitalize, the company was in crisis mode. The stock had dropped 23% on news that their exclusive control of the Geller's treatment was in jeopardy. An emergency board meeting had been called, and Richard Harlow had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. I was immediately ushered into a meeting with the CEO, the head of legal, and 3 board members. Dr. Kwan, began CEO Sharon Miller, her tone carefully measured. We find ourselves in an unprecedented situation. I'd call it an entirely preventable one, I replied calmly. For the next hour, I laid out exactly what had transpired over the past 3 years, my groundbreaking research, Harlow's systematic appropriation of my work, and the lengths I had gone to document everything while still fulfilling my obligations to Revitalize. What exactly do you want? Asked Thomas Reardon, the lead board member. 3 things, I said without hesitation. First, scientific recognition as the primary developer of RVT 773. Second, a pricing structure that makes the treatment accessible to all Geller's patients, not just the wealthy or well-insured. And third, establishment of a research ethics committee with actual enforcement power to prevent this from happening to other scientists here. And if we refuse? Asked the head of legal. Then I proceed with my licensing arrangement with generic manufacturers. Revitalize faces years of patent litigation while watching its market share erode, and the scientific community learns exactly how this company treats its researchers. Or, I added, we could work together to save lives, maintain reasonable profits, and set a new standard for ethical pharmaceutical development. The negotiations lasted well into the night, but by morning, a framework had been established. Revitalize would acknowledge me as the primary researcher and developer of RVT 773. The treatment would be priced on a sliding scale, with significant discounts for lower-income countries and patient assistance programs in the U.S. Most importantly, I would head a new division focused on neurological treatments with guaranteed research funding and explicit protections for scientific attribution and ethical development practices. 1 week later, Revitalize called another press conference. This time, I stood at the podium, explaining the science behind RVT 773 with the precision and depth that comes from having actually developed it. Seated behind me was the company's leadership team, minus Richard Harlow, who had been quietly asked to resign after an internal review confirmed his systematic misrepresentation. The breakthrough in treating Geller's syndrome isn't just a victory for science, I told the assembled press. It's an opportunity to demonstrate that life-saving treatments can be both profitable and accessible. That we can honor the contributions of researchers while still meeting our obligations to shareholders. And most importantly, that no one should be denied care because they can't afford it. The announcement of Revitalize's new pricing model, alongside my clear description of the scientific journey, generated headlines worldwide. The company's stock, after an initial drop, rebounded to reach new highs as investors recognized that sustainable, ethical practices could actually enhance long-term value. 6 months later, as the first Jeller's patients began receiving treatments around the world, I received a letter from a 12-year-old girl in Malaysia whose family had access through our global affordability program. Dear Dr. Kwan, she wrote, yesterday I could not hold a pencil. Today I am writing you this letter myself. My neurologist says that in 3 months I might be able to play football again. Thank you for not giving up. I framed the letter and hung it in my new office, where it serves as a daily reminder of what's truly at stake in our work. Beside it hangs a simple plaque that I insisted be placed in every revitalized research facility. Behind every medical breakthrough are the researchers whose names history may forget, but whose dedication changes lives. May we honor their work by ensuring it reaches all who need it. Richard Harlow has largely disappeared from the pharmaceutical industry, though I occasionally see his name attached to consultancy roles at smaller firms. The journalist who first questioned his expertise, Lydia Chen, won a prestigious award for her investigation into credit appropriation in scientific research. As for me, I now lead a team of 30 researchers, each of whom has their contributions meticulously documented and acknowledged. We've developed 2 additional treatments based on the original molecular platform, both priced according to our accessibility commitment. Sometimes, when I'm working late in the lab, still my favorite place despite my executive title, I reflect on what might have happened if I hadn't prepared so thoroughly, documented so meticulously, protected my work so carefully. How many Jeller's patients would have been denied treatment they couldn't afford? How many researchers would have continued to see their work claimed by others? The true breakthrough, I've realized, wasn't just the molecular structure I sketched on that coffee shop napkin years ago. It was the recognition that scientific innovation doesn't exist in a vacuum, that its value lies not just in discovery, but in accessibility, not just in corporate ownership, but in human impact. And sometimes, ensuring that impact requires being as methodical in protecting your work as you are in conducting it. Because the most important element in any scientific formula isn't listed in the periodic table. It's the courage to stand up for the truth, even when powerful interests would prefer you remain invisible. A garden shed. I stared at the attorney in disbelief, my voice echoing in the mahogany-paneled conference room. My grandmother left her entire estate, the mansion, the vineyard, everything, to my cousins, and all I get is a garden shed. Gerald Hoffman, the family attorney for over 40 years, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. Ms. Rivera, I understand this must be disappointing, but the terms of Rosalind Blackwood's will are quite specific. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and continued reading. To my granddaughter Olivia, I leave my gardening sanctuary at the edge of the eastern woods and all its contents, along with the parcel of land extending 20 yards in all directions from its walls. My cousins, Julian and Charlotte, exchanged smug glances across the polished table. Charlotte barely suppressed a laugh behind her manicured hand. There must be some mistake, I insisted, fighting to keep my voice steady. I spent every summer with Grandma Rose. We were close. She wouldn't just. Well, you haven't exactly been around the last few years, have you? Julian cut in, his voice silky with false sympathy. While you were off playing with plants at university, Charlotte and I were actually helping grandmother manage the estate. I bit my tongue. I hadn't been playing with plants. I'd been completing my doctorate in botanical pharmacology, researching medicinal properties of rare plant species. But that had never impressed my status-conscious family. My name is Olivia Rivera, 28 years old, and until 10 minutes ago, I believed my connection with my grandmother, the formidable Rosalind Blackwood of Blackwood Estates, transcended the family politics that had driven me away from home. Is there anything else? I asked, struggling to maintain my composure. Hoffman nodded, producing a sealed envelope. Your grandmother asked that this be delivered to you privately after the reading. I took the envelope, ignoring Charlotte's curious stare. My grandmother's elegant script spelled my name across the front. Well, if that's everything, Julian said, rising to his feet. Charlotte and I have a meeting with the vineyard manager. We'll need to discuss transition of operations. He glanced at me with barely concealed triumph. Don't worry, Liv. You can stay in the guest house for a few days while you sort out your plans. After they left, I remained seated, turning the envelope over in my hands. "She loved you very much, Hoffman said quietly. "More than perhaps you realize." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and left with my letter and the key to my grandmother's garden shed. The drive to Blackwood Estates twisted through the California wine country, each familiar landmark intensifying my sense of betrayal. The grand iron gate still bore the family crest, an oak tree with roots that formed the letter B. The security guard nodded solemnly as I passed. News of the inheritance already spread among the staff. I avoided the main house, driving instead down the gravel path that led to the eastern woods. My grandmother's garden shed had always been her private retreat, off limits to everyone except me. As children, Julian and Charlotte had teased me mercilessly about being the garden girl allowed into Grandma's sacred space while they were banished to the tennis courts and swimming pool. The small stone building came into view, nestled at the edge of the woods. From the outside, it looked like a quaint cottage from a fairy tale. Ivy-covered walls, a slate roof, and a wooden door with an iron handle worn smooth from years of use. Nothing about it suggested value beyond sentiment. I parked and sat in my car, finally opening my grandmother's letter. "My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, then the inevitable has come to pass, and you're likely feeling confused and hurt by what appears to be a meager inheritance. Before you judge an old woman too harshly, I ask that you remember our conversations about appearances and perception. The garden has always been more than it seems, as you, of all people, should understand. What others see as a humble retreat, we recognized as a sanctuary of possibilities. I'm reconnecting with my roots," I said, unable to resist the pun she wouldn't understand. "Thanks for the offer, but the answer is no." The next morning, I woke early and drove to Gerald Hoffman's office, bringing the journal and patent documentation. His eyes widened as I explained my discovery. "Your grandmother was more strategic than any of us realized," he said, reviewing the papers. "These patents alone are worth hundreds of millions, and the research potential of the plant collection." He shook his head in amazement. "Julian and Charlotte have been working with Golden Tree Pharmaceuticals," I told him. "They were planning to sell everything once they controlled the estate." Hoffman nodded grimly. "Your grandmother suspected as much. That's why she structured your inheritance the way she did. The garden shed and the 20 yards surrounding it in each direction contains the only access point to the most valuable part of the collection. So without my cooperation, they can't access or sell the most important specimens, and they have no legal claim to the patents. You effectively control the true Blackwood legacy." I left Hoffman's office with a plan in place. By noon, security experts were changing the locks and installing a sophisticated alarm system at the garden shed. By evening, I had filed injunctions preventing Julian and Charlotte from conducting any excavation on the estate without proper environmental impact studies. Studies that would inevitably reveal the underground complex they thought was their secret. 3 days later, I sat in the garden shed, cataloging specimens when I heard cars approaching. Julian and Charlotte arrived with a man in an expensive suit, presumably from Golden Tree Pharmaceuticals. "This is private property," I called out as they approached the door. "Don't be childish, Olivia," Julian said, his composed facade cracking slightly. "Mr. Doherty has come all the way from San Francisco to discuss a business opportunity that could benefit all of us." "How thoughtful," I replied, stepping outside to meet them. "But I've already had some interesting discussions with Hoffman about the underground botanical research facility and the patent portfolio." The color drained from both my cousins' faces. Mr. Doherty looked between us, confused. "Patent portfolio?" he asked. "Oh, did my cousins forget to mention that part?" I smiled pleasantly. "All the pharmaceutical patents derived from the botanical specimens are held in my name, not theirs. Has been for years." "That's impossible," Charlotte spluttered. "Grandmother left us the estate." "She left you the house and the vineyard," I corrected. "Lovely property, terrible investment compared to what's under it. But then you never did pay attention to her gardening hobby, did you?" Mr. Doherty cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting once the family has sorted things out." After he departed, Julian turned on me, fury in his eyes. "You think you've won? We'll contest the will. We'll claim she wasn't competent." "You could try," I agreed. "But then I'd be forced to make public her final journals, including her documentation of your secret meetings with Golden Tree, planning to sell off her life's work the moment she died. I wonder how that would look to a judge." 1 week later, I sat with Julian and Charlotte in Hoffman's office, a new agreement between us drafted and ready for signatures. I didn't have to wait until midnight. I knew where the moonflowers grew in a secluded clearing about 50 yards from the shed. Grabbing a flashlight, I followed the path into the woods, guided by memory and the glowing map now impressed in my mind. The moonflower clearing appeared unchanged, a perfect circle of the pale, luminous blooms that opened only at night. But now, seeing it with fresh eyes and my grandmother's cryptic message in mind, I noticed something I'd overlooked before. The flowers weren't planted randomly, they formed a pattern identical to the constellation Cassiopeia, my grandmother's favorite. In the center of the arrangement stood a peculiar stone pedestal I'd always assumed was decorative. Examining it closely, I discovered a small keyhole concealed among the carved ivy leaves. My grandmother's key fit perfectly. When I turned it, the top of the pedestal slid open, revealing a hidden compartment containing a leather-bound journal and an antique silver key much larger than the first. The journal was my grandmother's, its pages filled with her elegant handwriting and detailed botanical illustrations. As I flipped through it, a folded document fell out. A deed and a map showing an extensive network of tunnels beneath Blackwood Estate, dating back to Prohibition when my great-grandfather had used them to store and transport illegal spirits. But my grandmother had repurposed them. According to her journal, the tunnels now house one of the most valuable botanical collections in the world. Rare medicinal plants, many thought extinct, growing in a perfectly controlled underground environment. The final pages revealed the truth. The real Blackwood fortune wasn't the vineyard or the mansion. It was the pharmaceutical patents my grandmother had quietly secured over decades based on compounds derived from her rare plant collection. Patents worth billions, all assigned to a trust bearing my name. A text message made my phone buzz. $50,000 for the shed. Final offer. Julian. I smiled to myself. Julian had no idea what he was really bargaining for. The silver key opened a concealed door built into the hillside behind the moonflower clearing. Inside, stone steps descended into darkness. I followed them down, using my flashlight to guide the way. What awaited below took my breath away. A vast underground complex stretched before me, illuminated by specialized growing lights. Climate-controlled chambers house hundreds of plants, many I recognized from textbooks as extremely rare or presumed extinct. A state-of-the-art laboratory occupied one section, while another contained filing cabinets full of research data and patent documentation. This was my grandmother's true legacy, not a status symbol like the estate above, but a scientific treasure trove with the potential to transform modern medicine. As I explored, I discovered a small office with a computer and more recent journals. The most recent entry, dated just 2 weeks before her death, revealed another shock. Julian and Charlotte had discovered part of the underground facility months ago and had been negotiating with Golden Tree Pharmaceuticals to sell the entire collection, patents and all, once they inherited the estate. What they didn't know was that my grandmother had already moved the most valuable specimens to a section accessible only through the garden shed entrance. She had also transferred all patent rights to my name long before her death. My phone rang again, Charlotte this time. Julian told me about his offer, she said without preamble. I'm authorized to go to $75,000. That's more than generous, Olivia. It certainly would be, I replied calmly, if I were selling. Don't be difficult, she snapped. What could you possibly want with that shabby little building? You don't even live here anymore. I'm reconnecting with my roots, I said, unable to resist the pun she wouldn't understand. Thanks for the offer, but the answer is no. The next morning, I woke early and drove to Gerald Hoffman's office, bringing the journal and patent documentation. His eyes widened as I explained my discovery. Your grandmother was more strategic than any of us realized, he said, reviewing the papers. These patents alone are worth hundreds of millions, and the research potential of the plant collection, he shook his head in amazement. Julian and Charlotte have been working with Golden Tree Pharmaceuticals, I told him. They were planning to sell everything once they controlled the estate. Hoffman nodded grimly. Your grandmother suspected as much. That's why she structured your inheritance the way she did. The garden shed and the 20 yards surrounding it in each direction contains the only access point to the most valuable part of the collection. So without my cooperation, they can't access or sell the most important specimens, and they have no legal claim to the patents. You effectively control the true Blackwood legacy. I left Hoffman's office with a plan in place. By noon, security experts were changing the locks and installing a sophisticated alarm system at the garden shed. By evening, I had filed injunctions preventing Julian and Charlotte from conducting any excavation on the estate without proper environmental impact studies. Studies that would inevitably reveal the underground complex they thought was their secret. 3 days later, I sat in the garden shed, cataloging specimens when I heard cars approaching. Julian and Charlotte arrived with a man in an expensive suit, presumably from Golden Tree Pharmaceuticals. "This is private property," I called out as they approached the door. "Don't be childish, Olivia," Julian said, his composed facade cracking slightly. "Mr. Doherty has come all the way from San Francisco to discuss a business opportunity that could benefit all of us." "How thoughtful," I replied, stepping outside to meet them. "But I've already had some interesting discussions with Hoffman about the underground botanical research facility and the patent portfolio." The color drained from both my cousins' faces. Mr. Doherty looked between us, confused. "Patent portfolio?" he asked. "Oh, did my cousins forget to mention that part?" I smiled pleasantly. "All the pharmaceutical patents derived from the botanical specimens are held in my name, not theirs. Has been for years." "That's impossible," Charlotte spluttered. "Grandmother left us the estate." "She left you the house and the vineyard," I corrected. "Lovely property, terrible investment compared to what's under it. But then you never did pay attention to her gardening hobby, did you?" Mr. Doherty cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting once the family has sorted things out." After he departed, Julian turned on me, fury in his eyes. "You think you've won? We'll contest the will. We'll claim she wasn't competent." "You could try," I agreed. "But then I'd be forced to make public her final journals, including her documentation of your secret meetings with Golden Tree, planning to sell off her life's work the moment she died. I wonder how that would look to a judge." 1 week later, I sat with Julian and Charlotte in Hoffman's office, a new agreement between us drafted and ready for signatures. "This is highway robbery," Julian muttered, glaring at the document. "It's actually quite generous," Hoffman countered. "Ms. Rivera is offering you continued ownership of the mansion and vineyard, with the provision that the underground facility and its access points remain under her exclusive control. She's also offering a 10% share in future profits from the patents, which is 10% more than you're legally entitled to." "And if we refuse?" Charlotte asked. "Then I'll exercise my right to the 20 yards in all directions from the garden shed," I explained calmly. "Which, if you review the survey maps, includes the main access road to the estate. I could make coming home rather inconvenient for you." They signed. 6 months later, Blackwood Botanical Research Center opened its doors in a new facility constructed adjacent to the original garden shed. Funded by licensing agreements with ethical pharmaceutical companies, we focused on developing affordable treatments derived from my grandmother's remarkable plant collection. Julian and Charlotte continued living in the mansion, hosting lavish parties and playing the role of wealthy vineyard owners. We maintained a cordial, if distant, relationship, united in public by the Blackwood name, separated in private by very different values. On the 1-year anniversary of my grandmother's death, I sat alone in the garden shed, now restored as a museum piece showcasing the beginnings of her botanical research. In my hands was the last of her journals, open to a page I'd read countless times. The true measure of a legacy isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you cultivate. Julian and Charlotte see Blackwood as something to possess and exploit. Olivia sees it as something to nurture and develop. In the end, wealth without purpose withers like a plant without water. Purpose without resources struggles like a seed on barren ground. But when the right person combines both, that's when true growth begins. Outside the window, the moonflowers were beginning to open in the twilight, their pale blooms luminous against the darkening sky. I'd expanded their garden, preserving the Cassiopeia pattern while adding new specimens around it. My grandmother had given me far more than a garden shed. She'd entrusted me with her life's work, her vision for the future, and the means to bring it to fruition. While Julian and Charlotte had inherited the Blackwood name and facade, I had inherited its heart and purpose. Sometimes the most valuable legacies are hidden beneath the surface, visible only to those who know where and how to look.